Hello, my YouTube family, and especially the younger ones tuning in. Welcome to Crime Whispers. I'm here to guide you through another case tonight. I know many of you use these videos to unwind or drift off to sleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, I'd love to know where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now. Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. Case 1. Willie Tanner Slow. An atmospheric tone, Willie Tanner, 49, was a familiar and respected figure in the small southern town of Tipton. He owned Tanner Hardware, a cozy, old-fashioned hardware store that had served the community for over 20 years. Known for his warm smile and helpful advice, Willie was the kind of person you'd go to for a tool and end up chatting with about life. He was married to his high school sweetheart, Lynn Tanner, 48. The couple was active in church events and local charities. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but behind closed doors, Willie was hiding a dark secret. He had begun a secret relationship with 18-year-old Madison Kelly, a high school senior. What started as small talk during her visits to the store quickly turned into a passionate, emotional affair. Madison was beautiful, intelligent, and full of life. But Willie, torn between guilt and obsession, couldn't pull away. As Christmas approached in 2019, Willie's behavior started to shift. He was distant, distracted, and spent more time at work than at home. Lynn thought it was just the holiday rush. Neighbors noticed, too. His usual charm seemed dimmed by something heavy weighing on his heart. Then, on the morning of December 22nd, just 3 days before Christmas, Lynn returned home from Sunday service. She'd been helping out with preparations for the church's Christmas Eve program. But something felt off. Willie's truck was in the driveway. Even though he'd said he needed to run errands. Inside the house, it was quiet, too quiet. The scent of pine lingered from their Christmas tree, still lit and surrounded by carefully wrapped gifts. But Willie didn't answer when she called for him. Then she found him, lying near the tree. Surrounded by broken ornaments and tinsel was Willie's body. His head had been bludgeoned, and nearby, a bloodied hammer lay on the floor. The cheerful holiday decor stood in chilling contrast to the brutal scene. Lynn collapsed in shock, but managed to call 911. Her voice trembled through tears as she told the operator, "Oh my God, my husband isn't breathing, there's blood everywhere." Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived. Neighbors watched in horror from their windows as the street filled with flashing lights. Leading the investigation was Detective Nora Collins, a seasoned officer with a reputation for being sharp, thorough, and unshakable. Inside the home, she took in the grim sight, Christmas lights flickering over blood-soaked wrapping paper. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. It looked like Willie had been caught completely off guard. Dr. Philip Wong, the medical examiner, estimated the time of death to be between 10 p.m. and midnight the night before. The injuries to Willie's head indicated a violent, sudden attack. Detective Collins noted the personal nature of the crime. This wasn't random, it was driven by deep emotion, rage, jealousy, heartbreak. That suspicion led her to one person, Madison Kelly. Suspect, MadisonKelly.com, eerie tone. Madison lived with her mother Tammy on the edge of town. Their home was neat, but tense. Tammy had always been strict, especially after Madison's father had come out and left the family. Madison, emotionally fragile and craving connection, had been drawn to Willie in ways that quickly became unhealthy. When Collins arrived, Madison was still in her pajamas, visibly shaken. Her room was typical for a teen, posters of Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande, but something stood out. A framed, shirtless photo of Willie sat on her nightstand. Her diaries, later taken as evidence, were filled with graphic, obsessive writings about their affair. Madison admitted to the relationship, confessing that she had fallen deeply in love. She believed they had a future together, but recently, things had changed. Willie had grown distant. Madison feared he was about to break things off right before Christmas. When asked where she was the night Willie died, Madison hesitated, then claimed she'd been home studying for finals. Her alibi was shaky. Her hands trembled. At times, she seemed grief-stricken. Other times, erratic. She insisted she had nothing to do with the murder, but Detective Collins sensed there was more to her story. And she was right. As the investigation progressed, Madison Kelly's story began to unravel. During questioning, Madison suddenly introduced a mysterious figure she referred to only as Bob. According to her, Bob had manipulated her, allegedly coercing her into maintaining a sexual relationship with Willie. She claimed he threatened to torture her if she didn't comply. But when Detective Collins pressed for more details who Bob was, where he came from, what kind of threats he made, Madison grew vague and confused. Detective Collins remained skeptical. Madison's fragile emotional state, her obsession with Willie, and her shaky alibi all pointed to her as the most likely suspect. But Collins knew that accusations required evidence and, so, the investigation had to continue. The next person on Detective Collins' list was Lynn Tanner, Willie's wife of 25 years. Lynn was a familiar face in the Tipton community, warm, gracious, and always involved in church events. On the surface, her marriage had appeared strong, but as Collins dug deeper, it became clear that Lynn had long harbored suspicions of infidelity. In the days before the murder, Lynn had been busy preparing for Christmas, especially for the upcoming Christmas Eve service at First Baptist Church. Outwardly, she was focused on faith and family, but internally, she was unsettled. Willie had been absent more often, claiming to be working late or busy with church obligations. Yet something didn't sit right during their interview on December 22nd. Lynn sat quietly at the kitchen table, still reeling from the horror of discovering her husband's body that morning. Through tears, she spoke about their marriage, how the intimacy had faded over the years, especially after their son left for college. She admitted she had suspected an affair, but had never found proof. On the night of the murder, Lynn said she was home preparing for church, then went to bed early. She assumed Willie would join her later. When she woke in the night and realized he hadn't, she simply believed he'd fallen asleep in the living room, till the nightmare revealed itself the next morning. Her timeline was straightforward. She was cooperative, even offering full access to Willie's phone and computer. But Detective Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Lynn, betrayed and heartbroken, may have snapped. The violence of the crime suggested raw emotion, a sense of betrayal or revenge. Still, Lynn's visible grief and openness made it difficult to draw conclusions. Collins wasn't ready to rule her out, but she also couldn't pin it on her. Not yet. Then came the third name on her list, Tammy Kelly, Madison's mother. Tammy was a dominating presence in Tipton, known for her perfectionism and obsession with appearances. She kept a spotless home and a tight grip on her daughters' life, especially after her husband came out as gay and left the family. She threw herself into church events and community gatherings, but those who knew her well sensed a darker intensity beneath the polished surface. Her relationship with Madison was turbulent. Neighbors whispered about Tammy's extreme discipline, including one unsettling rumor that she spanked Madison whenever she believed the girl was attracting too much male attention. She had controlled everything: Madison's clothes, her activities, even her social circle. When Detective Collins visited on December 23rd, Tammy welcomed her into a pristine living room decked out with flawless Christmas decorations. But beneath her calm exterior was a noticeable tension. She spoke politely, but with clipped words, defensive, cold. As the investigation moved forward, the case against Madison grew more complex, and so did the legal battle. Defense attorney Karen Blackwell, 45, stepped in to represent Madison, known for her sharp mind and empathetic approach. Blackwell made a compelling argument. Madison, she said, was a mentally unstable teenager, groomed and manipulated by a much older man, caught in a secret hypersure relationship. She eventually broke under the strain. Blackwell pointed to Madison's strict upbringing, emotional isolation, and the overwhelming fear of abandonment. She asked the jury to see not just a killer, but a vulnerable girl, shattered by circumstances far beyond her years. Throughout the trial, Willie's family sat silently in the front row, their faces marked by a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. They were forced to hear every dark detail of his double life, mourning not only the man they lost, but the man they never truly knew. After days of gripping testimony, the jury reached its verdict. On February 18, 2020, Madison Kelly was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. The verdict sparked divided opinions. Some felt it was too light given the brutal nature of the crime. Others believed it was fair, considering Madison's age and psychological state. Willie's family expressed relief that the trial had ended, but they knew the emotional scars would never fully heal. Tipton, Georgia, slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but it wasn't the same. Willie Tanner's hardware store, once a central gathering place for the town, closed its doors for good. His family couldn't bear to keep it running. It was the end of an era, a painful reminder of all that had been lost. As for Madison Kelly, she began her sentence in a state prison. She reportedly attempted to feign signs of mental illness during intake, but the staff saw through it quickly. Whether it was part of a defense strategy or a genuine breakdown, no one could say for sure. One thing was clear, though: what began as a secret love spiraled into a deadly obsession. And for the small town of Tipton, the shadow of that December never quite faded, despite Madison Kelly's claims of mental illness during the trial. Psychiatric evaluations conducted in prison found no signs of schizophrenia or any other condition that could explain her behavior. There was no diagnosis, no clinical excuse, just a trail of emotional devastation. Madison now spends her days in quiet isolation. Her once bright future has faded into a bleak reality behind bars. With few visitors and little connection to the outside world, the vibrant high school senior she once was is now only a memory. Meanwhile, Lynn Tanner, Willie's widow, struggled to pick up the pieces. Learning that her husband had been unfaithful was heartbreaking enough, but the fact that his affair was with an 18-year-old girl made the pain even deeper. Though she received comfort from her church community, Lynn chose to grieve in private. She sold the family home and quietly relocated to a nearby town, hoping for a fresh start, far from the memories that had shattered her life. Tammy Kelly, Madison's mother, also faced the fallout. The trial cast a long shadow over her, with many in the community pointing fingers, blaming her controlling nature for Madison's unraveling. Once a regular at local events and a fixture in church circles, Tammy became a social outcast. The grip she once had on her daughter's life was gone, and so was her standing in the town. She, too, withdrew from public life. For the people of Tipton, the events of that December became a chilling reminder. Even in a close-knit town, secrets can tear families apart and lead to unthinkable tragedy. That year's Christmas was quieter, more somber. The festive lights still glowed, but beneath them lay an undercurrent of grief. The story of Willie Tanner and Madison Kelly became one of the darkest chapters in the town's history, a memory that time will never fully erase. Case 2. Calm, curious tone. Zephany Nurse high school friendships often bring a sense of nostalgia. Laughs in the hallways, inside jokes, and late-night study sessions. But for one teenage girl in South Africa, a seemingly ordinary school friendship would unravel a mystery so profound it would change the course of her life forever. Zephany Nurse was born on April 30th, 1997, in Cape Town. She was the cherished daughter of Celeste and Maureen Nurse. But just 3 days after her birth, on March 30th, tragedy struck. A woman, dressed in a nurse's uniform, quietly entered the hospital's maternity ward. Pretending to be part of the staff, she stole the newborn from her mother's side and vanished. For 17 years, the nurses lived in anguish, not knowing what had happened to their baby girl. Years later, a teenager named Cassidy started attending a new school. There, she met Mitch Solomon, a girl several years older. The two quickly became close, almost inseparable. But there was something about Mitch that intrigued Cassidy, and not just her personality. The resemblance between them was uncanny, so striking in fact, that classmates began to joke they might be sisters. Cassidy eventually shared her suspicions with her parents. Curious and cautiously hopeful, the nurses discreetly obtained a DNA sample and had it tested. The results were astounding. Mitch Solomon was, in fact, Zephanie nursed their long-lost daughter. She had spent her entire life being raised under a different name by Lavona Solomon and her husband Michael. Lavona, the woman who had abducted her, had posed as a nurse on that fateful day. Zephanie had grown up with no idea that she had been taken from her biological family. After the truth emerged, Lavona was arrested and charged with kidnapping. During her trial, she tearfully claimed that she had recently suffered multiple miscarriages and had been tricked into believing the child she took was given to her through an informal adoption. But the court didn't buy it. The judge made it clear her refusal to admit the truth or show genuine remorse only added to the severity of her sentence. Lavona Solomon was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As for her husband Michael, it's believed he had no idea Zephanie wasn't his biological child until police arrived at their door. At first, Zephanie rejected her biological parents. She was devastated by the arrest of the only mother she had ever known. But over time, she opened up to the nurses and began building a relationship with them. Today, she maintains ties with both families, one biological, the other emotional. "I mostly live from day to day," Zephanie once said. "The mother who raised me will always be a part of my life." Case 3. Growing suspense. Vera. It was a cold December evening in 1997 when Los Cuevas, a 31-year-old mother of 3 in Philadelphia, left the house to look for work. Her boyfriend, Pedro Vera, had taken the day to visit family. Their children, 2 young boys, and a 10-day-old baby girl named Delimar, were left in the care of Pedro's mother. When Luz returned around 5 p.m., she was met with a nightmare. The second floor of their home was engulfed in flames. Everyone managed to escape except baby Delimar, frantic. Luz ran inside, desperately searching for her daughter, but all she found was a burned crib. There were no remains, just ashes, smoke, and a haunting silence. Still, she pleaded with the firefighters. "My baby is missing," she screamed. "She's not in there." But no one believed her. Luz was taken to the hospital with minor burns, but all she could think about was her baby. A police report would later claim that Delimar had died in the fire, her body consumed by the flames. The case was closed, but Luz never accepted that there were too many strange details. The empty crib, the wide-open window in the baby's room, and no trace of remains. She became convinced her daughter had been kidnapped. Year after year, Luz told her story. Most dismissed her as delusional. Even Pedro urged her to move on. They eventually had another child, but separated in 2000. Still, Luz never gave up hope. Then, in January 2003, something unexpected happened. Luz attended a birthday party hosted by Pedro's sister. Among the guests was a woman named Caroline Correa, Pedro's cousin by marriage. Caroline had a 6-year-old daughter named Olia Hernandez. When Luz saw the girl, her heart skipped a beat. The resemblance was uncanny. Olia looked just like Delimar. Same dimples, same expressions, same spark in her eyes. She even resembled Luz's other children. Luz called the girl over, her voice gentle but trembling. What happened next would change everything. Caroline had told Delimar that she had gum stuck in her hair. Carefully, she pulled out a few strands and wrapped them in a napkin. Later, loser Delmar's biological mother turned that napkin over to the authorities, suspecting that the child, named Alia, was actually her missing daughter. But law enforcement initially dismissed her claim as far-fetched. Refusing to give up, Loser approached State Representative Angel Cruz, who took her maternal instincts seriously. With his support, investigators agreed to run a DNA test. The results were undeniable. 6-year-old Olia Hernandez was in fact Delmar Vera. Caroline was taken into custody, and a follow-up DNA test confirmed she was not Delmar's biological mother. She was arrested and charged with kidnapping. Within a month, Loser was joyously reunited with Delmar, who was soon embraced by her 3 new brothers. Pedro, Delmar's biological father, later obtained shared custody, offering the little girl a brighter, more stable future. Years later, Delmar would reflect on her traumatic journey with gratitude, thankful for finding her real mother and the loving family she was meant to have. But how had Delmar ended up with Caroline in the first place? It was eventually uncovered that Caroline had visited Loser on the very day the baby went missing. That evening, she returned home with Delmar, started a fire in Loser's residence, seemingly to cover her tracks. Shockingly, it wasn't the first time Caroline had set ablaze. In 1995, she had set fire to a medical clinic after allegedly being dismissed for committing fraud. That same night of the kidnapping, Caroline called her boyfriend, Andre Moore, and falsely claimed she had just given birth. They named the baby Olia. As the child grew older, Andre began questioning her origins and demanded a paternity test, which confirmed he was not the biological father. After their breakup, Caroline continued to raise Delmar as her own, just 3 miles from Loser's home in Philadelphia. Even after the DNA results proved otherwise, Caroline insisted Delmar was her biological daughter. However, there was one major flaw in her story. Caroline had undergone a tubal ligation, a permanent sterilization procedure, in 1990. Medically, she could not have conceived or given birth. Later, she altered her story again, claiming she had received the baby from Pedro, Loser's ex, after suffering a stillbirth. But no hospital record supported her claim, and Pedro firmly denied any involvement in the abduction. Investigators ultimately ruled him out. Psychologists diagnosed Caroline with pseudopsoriasis, a rare condition in which a woman falsely believes she is pregnant. They concluded that Caroline genuinely believed Delmar was her own child, but the judge wasn't convinced. She was delusional. He believed her actions were calculated and malicious. Caroline was found guilty of kidnapping, arson, assault, hiding the whereabouts of a child, and interfering with custody. She was sentenced to 9 to 30 years in prison. Tanya Kak, 13-year-old Tanya Nicole Ketch, was a bright, ambitious student who consistently made the honor roll. But more than that, she was known for her joyful energy and kindness, a girl whose presence lit up any room. She was also obedient and responsible, always following her parents' instructions. So, when Tanya didn't come home from school one day, her family knew something terrible had happened. About 6 months before her disappearance, a new security guard named Thomas Hose had started working at Tanya's middle school. He was a middle-aged man with black, slightly tousled hair, known for his laid-back attitude and quick jokes that often made the kids laugh. Tanya, just 13 at the time, was drawn to his warm demeanor and seemed to find comfort in his attention, especially as her parents were going through a difficult divorce. Hose used this emotional vulnerability to manipulate her. He would frequently pull Tanya out of class to talk, buying her candy and cigarettes while offering a sympathetic ear. Eventually, during one of their conversations, Hose suggested she run away with him, promising her peace from all the chaos at home. Desperate for comfort and attention, Tanya agreed, unaware of the nightmare that awaited her. Hose lived just 2 miles away from Tanya's home, but once she entered his house, her freedom was stripped away. He confined her to a small second-story bedroom because he still lived with his parents. He made sure to keep her hidden. She was given a bucket for a toilet, and only allowed to shower when the house was empty. Even walking across the room required memorizing which floorboards creaked. For 4 years. She saw no one but Hose. The abuse, both physical and emotional, was relentless. He beat her, threatened to kill her, and told her she now belonged to him. Holidays were especially painful. Tanya would sit alone in a closet, listening to the sounds of joy and laughter downstairs. A brutal reminder of the life she once knew. In a disturbing twist, Tanya's father, Jerry Catch, actually crossed paths with her abductor 3 years into her captivity. At a school event, he spoke with Hose, who was still working as a security guard. Jerry even asked if he had heard anything about his daughter. Hose lied and said no. When Tanya turned 18, Hose finally allowed her to meet his parents, introducing her as Nikki Allen, his new live-in girlfriend. While she was no longer locked in the upstairs room, she still wasn't allowed to leave the house without him. It took another 3 years before she was permitted to go out alone, under strict time limits. Tanya began frequenting a nearby deli, owned by Joe and Janet Sparico. Over the next 8 months, she built a quiet trust with them. Finally, one day, in March 2006, she confided in them. "If you go to a missing children's website," she said, "you'll find my picture there." Joe and Janet called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and were shocked to learn that Tanya had indeed been missing for 10 years. Unsure of the next steps, Joe contacted his son Sean, a retired police detective. Coincidentally, Sean had worked on Tanya's missing persons case years earlier. Her photo had even hung in his office. He immediately recognized her. The next day, 24-year-old Tanya Ketch was finally free. Police escorted her from the house that had been her prison. She waited outside for her father, the man who never gave up hope. During Hose's trial, Tanya bravely took the stand and testified to the years of torment she endured. Hose, however, interrupted her, insisting he had only taken her in to protect her from the streets. "You took away my innocence, my childhood," Tanya told him. Although he faced up to 100 years in prison, Thomas Hose was sentenced to just 15. He was also barred from contacting anyone in the Ketch family again. Tanya's reunion with her family brought joy, but it wasn't without challenges. Her father struggled to understand what had happened, at times placing blame on Tanya. Still, she began the long journey of healing, one step at a time. The disappearance and reappearance of Natasha Ryan, a story stranger than fiction, he told Tanya. He knew exactly what he was doing, even going so far as to sue her after the release of her New York Times best-selling Memoir of a Milk Carton Kid, the Tanya Nicole Kosh story, in which she claimed her father's neglect left her vulnerable to predators like Thomas, Natasha, and Ryan. Natasha Ryan was born in 1984 in Rockhampton, Queensland, a city of about 68,000, known for its tight-knit community and generous spirit. As a baby, she learned to walk early, earning her the affectionate nickname Grasshopper from her father. Her childhood was, for the most part, happy and nurturing until her early teens, when everything began to unravel. Her parents' marriage collapsed under strain, and after their divorce, Natasha was left in her mother's care while her father moved away and started a new family. His absence weighed heavily on her, whether she was searching to fill that emotional void or merely reacting to her feelings of betrayal and abandonment. Natasha began down a troubling path at just 14. She began experimenting with drugs and entered into a relationship with Scott Black, a man 7 years older. Soon, she started disappearing for days at a time, vanishing without a word and sending her mother into a spiral of anxiety. In July 1998, Natasha left home to walk the family dog and didn't return. She was later found at a music venue in Rockhampton, and police discovered she had been staying at a hotel with Scott. He was charged with abduction but ultimately received only a fine for obstructing the investigation. But that wasn't the end of it. A month later, On August 31st, 1998, Natasha's mother dropped her off at school. That would be the last time she saw her daughter. When Natasha failed to return home, authorities assumed she had run away again, likely with Scott. Police searched his house and questioned him, but came up empty-handed. Weeks passed, then months. Natasha was still missing. With no new leads and no body, her case grew cold until more women in the area began disappearing, including a 9-year-old girl. Suspicion eventually turned to Mayoa Takuta, Natasha's childhood friend and the last known person to see her. At just 15, he and his family came under 24-hour surveillance. When he turned 16, police charged him with Natasha's murder, even though her body had never been found. Their main evidence, his apparent guilt, shown in gestures like sending Natasha's mother flowers every Mother's Day. But the charges against Mayoa were dropped when a new suspect entered the picture, Leonard Frazier, a convicted serial killer with a horrific record. Described as a textbook psychopath, Frazier was believed to be behind the spate of disappearances, including Natasha's. Initially, Frazier denied involvement, but while awaiting trial, a fellow inmate working undercover for the police managed to get him talking. Frazier eventually confessed to killing 5 people, including Natasha Ryan. He claimed he met her at a local cinema, offered her a ride home, then murdered her in his car and dumped her body in a nearby pond. But his details were vague. He couldn't accurately describe the location of the body, casting doubt on his entire confession. Still, Natasha was presumed dead. Her family, devastated, held a memorial service for her in 2001 on what would have been her 17th birthday. But Natasha wasn't dead. She had been alive the entire time, secretly living with Scott Black. Over the years, they had moved several times, evading detection. Their final hideout, just a few streets away from her childhood home in North Rockhampton. Scott had been working at a local dairy factory, blending into the community. No one suspected he was hiding anyone. He handled the shopping and laundry alone. Whenever someone came by unannounced, Natasha would hide in the bedroom cupboard. Other times, she lived freely inside the house, reading, sewing, cooking, and browsing the internet. She ventured outside only occasionally, usually for late-night walks or during moves. In 2003, just 3 weeks before Frazier's trial, something changed. Perhaps it was guilt, or the growing weight of knowing an innocent man might take the fall for her supposed murder. Natasha reached out to a children's counseling service under a false name. She claimed to be a runaway whose boyfriend was hiding her, and that someone was about to stand trial for her murder. The call couldn't be traced, but it raised red flags. Soon after, Rockhampton police received an anonymous letter containing a phone number and a chilling message. Natasha Ryan was alive. On the night of April 10, 2003, police stormed Scott Black's home on Mills Avenue. Inside the bedroom cupboard, they found Natasha, pale and terrified, her skin ghostly white from 5 years without sunlight. The revelation stunned the courtroom. On the 12th day of Leonard Frazier's murder trial, prosecutors dropped a bombshell. Natasha Ryan was not only alive, she had never even met Frazier. In fact, she appeared at her own murder trial to give evidence, shocking both the jury and the public. Her father, Robert Ryan, assumed the announcement meant her remains had been found. When told she was alive, he was so overwhelmed he nearly collapsed. To be sure, it was truly her. He called the station and asked the woman on the line to say her childhood nickname. The voice on the other end replied, "Dad, it's me, Grasshopper. I love you, and I'm sorry." Her mother, Jenny Ryan, was furious at first. Natasha had let her family grieve for 5 agonizing years, thinking she was dead, while she lived barely a mile away. But when Jenny saw her daughter again, all the anger dissolved. They embraced in tears, reunited at last. Despite Natasha's testimony, Frazier was still convicted of 4 other murders and sentenced to life in prison. He died of a heart attack 4 years later. As for Natasha Ryan, her story, once believed to be a tragic mystery, ended as a bizarre tale of deception, survival, and ultimately, redemption. There was joy in Natasha's return, a sense of healing, as she walked through the door and into the arms of her parents. But that joy was shadowed by the immense sorrow they had endured during her absence, a wound that still hadn't fully healed. Natasha faced harsh criticism from the public. Some news outlets even vilified her. People asked, how could she leave without a word? In 2005, her boyfriend Scott Black was sentenced to 1 year in prison for misleading police about her whereabouts. Then, in 2006, Natasha was found guilty of orchestrating a fake police investigation. The court fined her $4,000 and ordered $16,000 in restitution to cover the cost of the manhunt. In the years that followed, Natasha became a figure of public scrutiny, mocked, humiliated, and heavily judged. But in a strange twist of fate, what had once been her downfall turned into her opportunity. Natasha capitalized on the media attention by selling the rights to her story to Australian news outlets and magazines, reportedly earning around 150,000 Australian dollars. In 2008, after marrying Scott, she sold their wedding photos for another 200,000. Today, the couple remains together and have 3 children. Case 3 in a quiet home near the woods. A man suddenly collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Moments later, his wife rushed out of the bedroom, alarmed by the noise only to freeze at the sight before her. A figure stood in the living room, holding a gun. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then came more gunshots. By morning, the house had fallen silent. Nothing was missing. There were no signs of forced entry. Just 2 lifeless bodies lying side by side, beneath a blanket, almost as if someone had tried to hide what had happened. Who would do this, and why? Investigators would soon uncover a dark and unexpected story, one that shattered the peace of this seemingly idyllic town. Brian and Beverly's story began on a spring evening in 2001. They met at a friend's party while both were in college, and from their very first interaction, there was a spark. Curiosity quickly deepened into affection, and by the end of summer, they were inseparable. As their relationship grew, so did their bond with each other's families. Everyone could see how well they complemented one another. Beverly was a vibrant athlete skilled in baseball and track, fluent in multiple languages, and a gifted guitarist. Brian, on the other hand, craved adrenaline, rock climbing, surfing, scuba diving. He was always chasing the next thrill. Together, they were a perfect balance of energy, passion, and determination. Though they were deeply committed, marriage wasn't rushed. They wanted to finish school and build solid careers first. After graduation, Brian began working for an industrial firm, while Beverly pursued hotel administration, where her language skills proved invaluable. On May 15, 2006, they were married, in a breathtaking seaside ceremony. Their honeymoon was a globe-trotting adventure, and afterward, they settled in Graham, Pennsylvania. Their new home sat near a river in a wooded area, peaceful retreat, where they hoped to build a life together. Brian worked as an engineer. Beverly continued her studies and took up translation work. They quickly became part of the local community, but just a year later, their dream ended in tragedy. On the morning of November 17, 2007, Brian's longtime friend, Stephen, arrived as planned. He and Brian had arranged a fishing trip, but when Stephen knocked on the door, there was no answer. At first, he assumed his friend had overslept. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Assuming it was just a mix-up, Stephen waited in his car for about half an hour, trying to call multiple times, with no response. Eventually, he left to fish on his own, but by evening, unease crept in. He returned to the house and knocked again. Silence, circling the property. He peered through the windows only, to be met with darkness. When he reached the garage, he noticed Brian and Beverly's car was parked inside. That didn't make sense. As he approached the living room window and looked through the glass, something caught his eye. The television was toppled over. Beside, it was a large, unmoving shape. Stephen's heart began to pound. He rushed to his car, grabbed a flashlight, and aimed the beam through the window. What he saw chilled him to the core. Two bodies, motionless, partially concealed beneath a blood-soaked blanket. A bare foot and a lifeless hand peeked out from under the fabric. Panicked, he dialed 911, his voice shaking as he pleaded for help. Police arrived swiftly. Stephen was the first to be questioned, and he explained everything: the missed calls, the planned trip, and what he had found. Inside the home, officers found no signs of forced entry. The front door had been left unlocked. The living room scene was just as Stephen described: Brian and Beverly, side by side, each shot 3 times with what appeared to be a high-caliber weapon. The precision of the shots suggested the killer was skilled, possibly even a professional. There was no sign of robbery. Wallets, phones, and cash remained untouched. No evidence of a struggle. No defensive wounds. Whoever did this came with one clear objective: to kill. Then, something even more unsettling: the bodies had been moved post-mortem. Blood patterns revealed drag marks. There were also clumsy attempts to clean up. Smudges of blood streaked across walls and floors, as if the killer tried successfully to erase the horror they left behind. The question now loomed larger than ever: who would want this seemingly perfect couple dead, and why? Despite the killer's attempt to erase evidence, forensic specialists were able to reconstruct the brutal sequence of events. 6 spent shell casings lay scattered at the scene, carelessly left behind. The evidence suggested that a single assailant had fired, all the shots pointing to one person as solely responsible for the murders. There was no sign of forced entry, raising an unsettling possibility. The door had likely been unlocked, implying that Brian and Beverly had willingly let their killer inside. Investigators theorized that Brian answered a knock at the door and recognized the visitor. As he turned to lead them in, he was shot 3 times in the back. One bullet tore through his body and shattered the television, sending it crashing to the floor. The noise must have alerted Beverly, who likely emerged from the bedroom in horror, only to find her husband dead and an armed intruder standing over him. She tried to flee, but was gunned down from behind. 3 bullets struck her before she collapsed in the hallway. Her body was then dragged into the living room and placed beside Brian's. Both were still in their pajamas, indicating they had been attacked early in the morning, likely before their day had even begun. One puzzling detail stood out: the killer had covered their bodies with a blanket. Was this a sign of remorse or a crude attempt to conceal the violent scene? No one could say for sure. Blood had been smeared across the floor as though someone had tried to clean it up, only worsening the mess. A large bloodstain had been partially disturbed, suggesting someone had attempted to scrub it behind the couch. Officers discovered a plastic broom, its bristles caked with dried blood, yet the handle had been carefully wiped clean of fingerprints. This indicated the killer may have used it to obscure bloody footprints while ensuring they left no trace of their own. Smudged handprints and palm prints marked the walls, doors, and furniture, distorted and too unclear to yield a definitive match. But forensic experts knew one truth: the longer a killer remained at the scene, the more likely they were to leave behind something incriminating. And then, they found it. On the blanket covering the victims, investigators discovered a faint boot print, not a blood stain, but an impression left where a light layer of blood had settled. The tread pattern was distinctive. Forensic analysis linked it to a rare model of heavy-duty work boots. Tracing the model, lead detectives to a construction company in Clearfield County that had recently purchased several pairs. With this lead, investigators narrowed their focus to employees with access to those boots. Then came another potential breakthrough: a palm print discovered on a surface in the home. Analysts ran it through national law enforcement databases, but found no match. The suspect had never been fingerprinted and had no prior criminal record. That meant identifying them would be far more difficult. Naturally, the first person to draw suspicion was Stephen, the friend who discovered the bodies. He had visited the house twice that day and was the one who contacted authorities. The timing of his visits raised red flags. When detectives questioned him, Stephen was visibly shaken. He explained that, early that morning, he assumed Brian and Beverly were still sleeping when they didn't answer the door. It was only later in the day, after repeated attempts to reach them, that he returned and decided to investigate, ultimately making the grim discovery. When he realized he was being treated as a suspect, Stephen was stunned. He said he had spent the entire day fishing at a remote spot by the river. Unfortunately, no one had been with him, meaning he had no direct alibi. But investigators turned to technology. Traffic camera footage from the roads leading to and from the fishing area supported Stephen's story. His vehicle was seen traveling to and from the location at the times he claimed. Additional forensic testing further cleared him. His fingerprints didn't match any at the scene, and tests for gunshot residue on his hands and clothing came back negative. Moreover, the boot print found at the crime scene didn't match Stephen's shoe size, and he had no connection to the construction company tied to the boots. With no physical evidence linking him to the murders, Stephen was officially ruled out as a suspect. Still desperate for answers, detectives canvassed the neighborhood. Across the street, they spoke with Daniel and Jennifer Therese. Daniel answered the door and agreed to speak while his wife was at work. He remembered hearing loud noises around 5:30 a.m. on the morning of the murders. What he now believed were gunshots. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, but in hindsight, the sounds struck him as suspicious. Out of curiosity, he had looked out his window. Parked outside Brian and Beverly's home was a white pickup truck, a vehicle he didn't recognize and knew didn't belong to them. Moments later, he saw two men exit the house. The dim pre-dawn light made it difficult to get a good look at them, but he noted key features of the driver. A white male, around 40, solidly built, with long dark hair pulled into a ponytail and a mustache. Daniel also observed a tattoo on the man's left hand. Though he couldn't make out the exact design, it was the first substantial lead detectives had. Meanwhile, Beverly's mother recalled a troubling conversation she'd had with her daughter a few months before the tragedy. Beverly had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around a neighbor, Jeremy Flint, a 22-year-old with a reputation for dealing drugs. Jeremy's house attracted shady visitors, and other residents had expressed concern about his presence. Given his background, Jeremy became a person of interest. When officers went to question him, they found his house empty. Fearing he had fled, they dug deeper. Speaking to locals, detectives uncovered a possible motive. Several weeks before the murders, Jeremy had crashed a gathering at Brian and Beverly's home. Drunk and aggressive, he harassed women, insulted guests, and started arguments. Eventually, he was kicked out, but not before making a threatening remark. The couple would regret humiliating him. The following morning, Brian and Beverly discovered that several items were missing from their home, including a cell phone and a handgun with ammunition. Suspecting Jeremy, they confronted him directly. While they remained calm, they warned that if their belongings weren't returned, they'd go to the police. Jeremy denied taking anything, but the very next day, the stolen items mysteriously reappeared, left in the couple's backyard. Brian and Beverly were certain Jeremy had returned them under cover of darkness, though they had no proof. Even so, Beverly remained uneasy. She urged Brian to consider moving. Eventually, Jeremy resurfaced, returning to town days after the murders. Detectives immediately brought him in for questioning. At first, suspicions were high, but Jeremy had a solid alibi. He had been out of state visiting his parents at the time of the killings. Multiple witnesses confirmed his whereabouts, and he had only returned the day after the crime. Further forensic analysis also cleared him. None of his fingerprints or palm prints matched those at the scene. and he had no known connection to the work boots traced to the construction site, with no evidence linking him to the murders. Jeremy was ruled out. Investigators were back to square one, with few options remaining. They revisited the only witness who had offered anything substantial. Daniel Therese, a white pickup truck, was spotted near Brian and Beverly's home around the time of the murders, and when detectives questioned Daniel again, they noticed something strange. His story had changed. Suddenly, he claimed to recall specific details about what the suspects were wearing. He even described one man as having a scar on his cheek. This contradicted his original statement, in which he had said their faces were hidden beneath hoodies. Suspicious. Detectives asked Daniel to point out the window from which he claimed to have seen everything that morning. But when they tested the view, even in daylight, it was nearly impossible to make out anything clearly across the street, let alone before sunrise. The more they pressed, the clearer it became. Daniel's story didn't add up. Had he been lying from the beginning? And if so, why? A deeper investigation into Daniel's background uncovered a troubling past. Born in 1966 into a strict military family, Daniel's childhood was marked by instability. When he was just 4, his parents divorced, leaving him and his 3 older sisters in the care of their mother. His father quickly remarried and became largely absent from their lives. By 9th grade, Daniel's life had begun unraveling. He dropped out of school, ran away repeatedly, and turned to petty crimes. At 18, he was arrested for robbery. Surprisingly, his estranged father stepped in, securing a probation sentence and giving Daniel another chance. But Daniel squandered it. Over the following years, he was arrested multiple times for theft and drug-related offenses, often receiving lenient punishments. In the late 1980s, his father made a final attempt to help, bringing Daniel to Florida, enrolling him in a pricey rehab program, and helping him find a job. But within 6 months, Daniel was caught stealing again. This time, his father gave up, sending him back to live with his mother. By then, Daniel's mental health had seriously declined. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and prescribed medication, but he rarely took it as directed. Instead, he often mixed it with alcohol, leading to volatile and dangerous behavior. Then, in July 1991, tragedy struck. A heated argument with his mother turned into a frenzy of violence. Daniel stabbed her nearly 30 times. She died before help could arrive. At his trial, Daniel claimed he had been hearing voices, possibly laying the groundwork for an insanity defense. But psychiatric evaluations determined that he had been fully aware of his actions. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Despite the lengthy sentence, Daniel was released on parole in 2006, serving far less time than expected. While in prison, he had been exchanging letters with a woman named Jennifer. Their correspondence blossomed into a romantic relationship, and once Daniel was free, they married. He moved into Jennifer's home in the quiet town of Graham, but in doing so, Daniel violated his parole by crossing state lines. He should have been arrested, but a cascade of bureaucratic errors allowed him to slip through the cracks. A mistake even led to his fingerprints being wiped from law enforcement databases, effectively making him invisible. That error would prove devastating. After the Mocks were murdered, investigators found a bloody handprint at the crime scene, but without matching prints on file, it went unidentified. Meanwhile, detectives discovered that Daniel had once worked for the construction company that bought the rare work boots linked to the murders. Still, they lacked direct evidence to make an arrest. Then came a breakthrough. On November 24, 2007, detectives invited Daniel to the station under the pretense of helping create composite sketches. Daniel, eager to appear helpful, cooperated for nearly an hour, working on entirely fictional portraits. During the session, an officer casually entered the room and said they needed Daniel's fingerprints just to rule him out. For the first time, Daniel hesitated, but after a moment, he relented, confident that his prints weren't on file. Moments later, another officer dropped a casual bombshell: the bloody handprint at the Mock's home had been found to belong to the killer. Daniel's face tensed. He tried to explain away the print, saying he had visited the home before. The officer calmly explained that the print was left in blood, something only the killer could have done. Then, the conversation shifted. A detective brought up Daniel's criminal past, including the murder of his mother. Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled and described the killing in chilling, emotionless detail. His tone was unnervingly proud, almost boastful. As he spoke, forensic analysts confirmed what detectives had suspected. The bloody handprint at the crime scene was a perfect match to Daniel Therese. When confronted with the evidence, Daniel's smug demeanor vanished. His hands clenched, his eyes darkened. But before he could lash out, officers restrained him and arrested him. Faced with overwhelming proof, Daniel confessed. He said that the night before the murders, he had been drinking and using drugs at a bar. By early morning, broke and angry, he became fixated on a bizarre idea. Brian owed him money. A month earlier, Daniel had given Brian a tattoo as a favor. But now, in his paranoid, intoxicated state, he convinced himself that he deserved $50 for the work. At 5 a.m., Daniel grabbed his revolver and stormed over to the Mock's house. Brian, groggy and confused, answered the door. Daniel demanded money. Brian, not wanting trouble, turned toward the bedroom to grab some cash. But as he walked away, he muttered something that Daniel took as an insult. Enraged, Daniel shot him 3 times in the back. The gunshots woke Beverly. She rushed out to find her husband bleeding on the floor. She locked eyes with Daniel. Then she turned to flee, but 3 bullets struck her down before she could escape. Afterward, Daniel panicked. He ran home and woke Jennifer. To detectives' surprise, she wasn't shocked. Instead, she calmly agreed to help him cover it up. Together, they returned to the Mock's house. Jennifer moved Beverly's body beside Brian's and covered them with a blanket. She then helped erase bloody footprints with a broom and wiped down surfaces but missed one critical handprint. Daniel later disposed of the murder weapon in a nearby river. Despite multiple searches, the gun was never found. With Daniel's confession and forensic evidence, the case was sealed. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Jennifer, who claimed she acted out of fear, cooperated with investigators and received a 1-year sentence for tampering with evidence. The case seemed closed until 2015, when the past came crawling back in the most horrifying way. New homeowners had moved into the house where Daniel once lived with his mother. During renovations, they began digging up the backyard. They're buried deep in the soil. They found human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed detectives' worst fears. The skeletal remains belonged to a young woman who had vanished in 1990. As investigators reconstructed the events, a chilling story emerged. Daniel had known the woman. She was once his neighbor, and he had developed an interest in her. But when she rebuffed his romantic advances, Daniel responded with deadly violence. Fearing exposure, he buried her body in his mother's backyard, where it remained undisturbed and hidden for decades. The discovery of this long-buried evidence led to Daniel Tabar receiving a second life sentence. It became devastatingly clear. Daniel had always been a predator lurking in plain sight. For years, he had evaded justice until now. Case for on. The night of August 5, 2002, the quiet town of Troop, Texas, was winding down for the evening. Porch lights flickered on, families settled in, and all seemed calm. But inside the parsonage of the local Methodist church, something unspeakable was unfolding. A frantic knock shattered the silence. At a neighbor's door stood Pastor Mike Tabb, pale, breathless, and trembling. In his arms were his 2 young children, and panic was etched across his face. He spoke urgently. Something was terribly wrong. Minutes later, Police arrived at the scene. What they found inside stunned even the most seasoned officers. The master bedroom was in disarray, broken picture frames, overturned furniture, and clear signs of a violent struggle. In the middle of it all lay Mara Tab, lifeless on the floor. At first glance, it appeared to be a home invasion gone wrong. But the more investigators examined the scene, the less sense it made. A peaceful town, a beloved pastor, a devout and respected wife. None of it fit the chaos before them. So what had really happened that night? And who was responsible? The life of Mara Tab. Mara Tab was born on April 25, 1967, in Beaumont, Texas. She was one of two daughters raised by Jim and his wife, whose name remains unknown. In their household, her mother cared lovingly for the children, while Jim worked hard to provide financial stability. Mara and her sister Melanie were raised in a home filled with music and creativity, which deeply influenced their passions. From an early age, Mara displayed a strong love for music and a profound connection to her Christian faith. By age 11, she was fully immersed in the Methodist Church, taking part in social outreach and faith-based community work. Her voice, often accompanied by piano or guitar, moved congregations to tears. Mara's beauty, talent, and kind spirit left a lasting impression on those who met her. Friends described her as principled, kind-hearted, and someone who formed enduring bonds. Encouraged by her supportive parents, Mara pursued a formal music education at a prestigious private university in Texas, where she honed her craft and deepened her devotion to her faith. She eventually became the church's director of music and youth ministry, leading worship with her powerful soprano voice. For 3 seasons, she played a central role in organizing musical productions across the state, spreading the message of faith through song. Meeting Mike Tab. Mara had always dreamed of starting a family rooted in love and devotion to God. That dream began to take shape when she met Mike Tab. Born on July 7, 1961, in Texas, Mike was raised alongside his 2 brothers, Jeff and Danny, in a devout Methodist household. After completing his studies at a Christian seminary, he became a chaplain at a military camp in North Carolina. It was through church functions that Mara and Mike's paths began to intersect. She led worship music, and he delivered sermons. Their mutual admiration and shared spiritual values soon evolved into a deep friendship, which blossomed into a romantic relationship. A few months into their courtship, Mike approached Mara's parents to ask for her hand in marriage. With their blessing, he proposed. In 1998, the couple exchanged vows in a Methodist church, promising to love and support each other, guided always by faith. At the time of their marriage, Mara was 31 and Mike was 37. They began their life together at the military base where Mike continued his ministry. His powerful sermons quickly gained recognition, and he developed a reputation as a compelling preacher. Many considered him a devoted servant of Christ. Mara, now known as Mara Tab, became his steadfast partner in ministry, fully embracing the responsibilities that came with the role. A family grows, but cracks begin to show 2 years into their marriage. Mara became pregnant with their first child. On April 25, 2000, she gave birth to a baby boy, Jonathan. His arrival brought the couple immense joy. Mara devoted herself to motherhood while Mike traveled frequently for speaking engagements and ministry work. But Mike's increasing absence began to strain their marriage. Mara, now managing motherhood mostly alone, longed for her husband's presence. Their once solid harmony gave way to arguments and resentment. The emotional toll deepened when Mara suffered a miscarriage during a second pregnancy. Although the couple made efforts to mend their relationship, the healing was slow. By 2002, things seemed to be improving when Mara announced she was expecting again, but then came a disruption neither of them had anticipated. Mike was discharged from military service and reassigned to a civilian Methodist church in the small, rural town of Troop, Texas, population 1,900. A difficult transition, the timing couldn't have been worse. Mara, nearing the end of her pregnancy and caring for a 2-year-old, was forced to uproot her life, despite her reluctance. The move was swift. The arrival of a new pastor and his family was a big deal in such a close-knit community. Women from the church helped prepare the parsonage for the Tabbs, aware of Mara's advanced pregnancy. But Mara struggled to adjust. Overwhelmed and emotionally drained, she didn't express gratitude in the way the townspeople had expected. Whispers began. She was labeled cold, distant, even ungrateful. Civilian life was a tough adjustment for Mike, too. The structure and discipline of military service had been replaced by the informal dynamics of small-town church leadership. Financial uncertainties, constant community scrutiny, and mounting personal stress only added to the strain on their marriage. As tensions grew, Mara became a frequent topic of gossip. One particular incident sealed her reputation. In a moment of visible frustration, she confronted Mike publicly. In this conservative rural town, where wives were expected to be quietly supportive, the confrontation was viewed as deeply disrespectful. In a community where traditional gender roles were deeply rooted, Mara's assertiveness was seen as inappropriate. People began to whisper, labeling her a domineering wife, accusing her of mistreating her husband. The judgment weighed heavily on her. Isolated and increasingly unhappy, Mara started confiding in close friends and family, questioning whether the life she was living resembled the Christian home she had once envisioned. The emotional toll soon took a physical one. During her second pregnancy, complications led to an emergency C-section. On July 25, 2002, Mara gave birth to a baby boy. Her older son, Jonathan, just 2 years old, was overjoyed to have a baby brother. As Mara recovered, she tried to reintegrate into the community and fulfill the role of a pastor's wife. But something had changed. The wounds, emotional and physical, run deep. Tension within the marriage only grew, casting a shadow over the home. Like many struggling couples, they could have chosen to work through their issues or part ways amicably. But what happened next obliterated any chance at reconciliation in the most unthinkable way. On the night of August 5, 2002, a frantic 911 call came through emergency dispatch. A neighbor of the Tabb family reported that Pastor Mike had appeared on their doorstep, visibly shaken, clutching his 2 young sons, and begging for help. He said his wife had been attacked. She was unresponsive. Sheriff's deputies and firefighters rushed to the parsonage. What they found was a horrific scene. Mara, still dressed in her night clothes, just 6 weeks after giving birth, lay lifeless in the bedroom. The home was in disarray. Picture frames, overturned furniture, scattered belongings. Signs of a violent struggle were everywhere. Mike told officers he had just returned home and found the front door ajar. Inside, he'd discovered Mara's body. After checking for a pulse and finding none, he'd grabbed the boys and fled to the neighbors for help. Mara's body was taken to the morgue for autopsy. Even seasoned investigators were shaken by what they saw. Her face was brutally disfigured, her jaw shattered. A powerful blow to the head appeared to be the fatal injury. Mike made a peculiar comment during questioning. He suggested, unprompted, that his wife might have been attacked with a baseball bat. Investigators hadn't yet determined the weapon. The specificity of his guess immediately raised red flags. While detectives considered the possibility of a home invasion, that theory was quickly ruled out. Nothing had been stolen. Another possibility emerged: a crime of passion. That night, Mike was asked to place his sons in the care of their grandparents. Police collected his clothes and shoes for forensic testing and questioned him about his whereabouts earlier that evening. He said he had taken Jonathan to his parents' house, a claim that was later confirmed. In the quiet town of Troop, where the last homicide had occurred 5 years earlier, the news of Mara's brutal death sent shockwaves. Sympathy for Pastor Mike was widespread. He was a grieving husband, and now a single father to 2 small boys. The preliminary autopsy confirmed what many had feared. Mara had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Her jaw had been broken in multiple places, underscoring the savagery of the attack. Her funeral was an intimate, somber ceremony. A fellow minister spoke of Mara's unwavering faith and devotion. To many, her death was framed as a tragic but spiritual transition to eternal peace. Throughout the service, Mike appeared visibly grief-stricken, his sorrow moving those in attendance. Behind the scenes, investigators continued digging. A breakthrough came during a conversation with Mara's sister, Melanie. Through tears, she shared that Mara had confided in her just weeks earlier. Mara had found something disturbing, a promotional flyer for an exotic dance club tucked inside Mike's pants pocket. When she confronted him, Mike brushed it off, claiming it belonged to a congregation member he was counseling. But Mara wasn't convinced. Digging deeper, she uncovered a pattern. The ministry trips Mike often took weren't for church work. They were for something else entirely. Investigators followed this lead and found 2 secret P.O. boxes, one in Troop and another in North Carolina, where the couple had previously lived. These mailboxes had allowed Mike to maintain a double life. Hidden from Mara and the church, authorities suspected Mara had intended to expose Mike's secret sore, perhaps divorce him, and that this may have led to her murder. Surveillance teams monitored him closely. It didn't take long for Mike to reveal his true colors. Just days after Mara's funeral, he was seen frequenting strip clubs and escort services. One club he visited catered exclusively to high-profile clientele. He drank heavily, seemingly unburdened. Then came the turning point. Forensics discovered what they believed to be the murder weapon. Though the crime scene had been meticulously cleaned, something had been missed: a large wooden table with a missing leg. Luminol testing later revealed Mara's blood inside the trunk of Mike's vehicle and on his shoes, including the laces. With mounting evidence, the district attorney authorized an arrest warrant. On August 8, 2002, the town was rocked once again. Pastor Mike was arrested for the murder of his wife. But his stay behind bars was short-lived. He posted a $50,000 bail and was released the same day. Negotiations were already underway. A plea deal was being discussed. Mike would avoid a public trial in exchange for a 50-year prison sentence. But when the hearing arrived, Mike was nowhere to be found. Authorities learned that he had attempted suicide. His defense claimed he was hospitalized. Prosecutors insisted it was an attempt to escape justice. In the days prior, Mike had been staying with his parents. One afternoon, he went for a walk and didn't return. His family, alarmed, contacted the authorities. A search led to a lake, where Mike was found with a self-inflicted stab wound. The injury was serious enough to require immediate surgery. A witness later reported seeing him hiding behind a tree and throwing an object into the lake. Divers recovered a knife, believed to have been used in the suicide attempt. Prosecutors moved to increase his sentence from 50 to 55 years, and his bail was raised to $1 million. Finally, on September 29, 2003, Mike appeared in court. Emotionless, he formally accepted the plea deal. His attorney stated that avoiding a trial was a decision made in part to shield both families from painful details. He acknowledged Mike's responsibility in Mara's death, but suggested that the true motive may never be fully understood. The defense maintained that Mike's only wish was to protect his children from ever learning the horrific details of their mother's murder, but that wish would prove futile. The case had already captured the attention of the public, and no one would forget the tragic fall of Pastor Mike. The heartbreaking truth behind Mara's murder could no longer remain hidden. Before the court delivered its final sentence, Mara's sister Melanie took the stand to give a powerful victim impact statement on behalf of the family. Her voice trembled as she faced Mike, the man who had once vowed to love and protect Mara, now convicted of stealing her life. "You've orphaned your own children," she said, her words heavy with grief and anger. Melanie urged Mike to take responsibility, to finally stand before the court and admit that it was his hands that took their mother away. The judge then delivered the verdict. Mike Tabb was sentenced to 55 years in prison for Mara's murder. Under Texas law, prosecutors explained, he would not be eligible for parole until he had served at least 27.5 years. Throughout the trial, Mike remained eerily silent, showing no visible emotion. Reports later revealed that he had attempted suicide multiple times while incarcerated. Despite receiving psychological treatment, he remained tormented, perhaps overwhelmed by guilt. A man who once preached faith and morality, now trapped by his own darkness. In a final twist to the tragic tale, it was revealed that Mike ultimately served only 20 years of his sentence. He died in prison in 2023. His headstone, placed in a Texas cemetery, bore no date of death. The family released no official cause. Strangely, his memorial record still listed Mara as his spouse, and his tombstone was inscribed with the words, "Loving son." Perhaps he truly had been a devoted son in his earlier years. But in the end, Mike's selfish choices robbed his children of a father they could look up to and stole from Mara the future she had long dreamed of. A future as a mother, a wife, a witness to her sons growing into men. That dream died the moment Mike pulled the trigger. Case 5A911 call, reported a woman, lying unconscious at the bottom of a staircase outside an apartment complex. At first it seemed like a terrible accident, maybe a simple fall. Her belongings, purse, keys, wallet, were scattered around, but nothing appeared to be stolen, not even the cash. It didn't look like a robbery. Still, something felt off. When first responders arrived, they quickly realized this was no accident, and as detectives began their investigation, they discovered a chilling truth. This was a murder. The victim was Danita Smith, born on November 10, 1981, in New Bern, North Carolina. Danita was the light of her parents' lives, raised in a vibrant home with 3 siblings. Derek's and Danielle. Danita's joyful spirit stood out from an early age. Her radiant smile, warmth, and kindness made her unforgettable. A gifted student, Danita graduated high school with honors and attended North Carolina Central University, where she initially majored in English. But she soon discovered a passion for photojournalism. She became deeply engaged in visual storytelling, capturing powerful moments through her lens. Her talent earned praise from both peers and professors. Outside of school, Danita found love with her fiancé Jeremiah Studemeyer, a young police officer from Greensboro. The couple had been together for 6 years before getting engaged. Their love story seemed promising, filled with dreams of a wedding, careers, and a shared future. But one challenge remained: distance. After graduation, Jeremiah took a job in Greensboro, while Danita stayed in Durham, an hour apart. They relied on weekend visits to stay connected. What Danita didn't know was that distance had created an opening for betrayal. Jeremiah had secretly become involved with a coworker, Shannon Crawley, a 911 operator and single mother of 2, on the morning of January 4, 2007. Just after 10 a.m., a frantic 911 call came from a man living in a Durham apartment complex. A woman was lying at the bottom of a staircase, bleeding. When first responders arrived, Danita was already unresponsive. She was pronounced dead on the scene. Detective Sean Pate led the investigation. At first glance, it looked like Danita had suffered a fatal fall. Her scattered belongings made that seem plausible. But as investigators examined the scene more closely, something didn't add up. Her wallet still held cash. If this had been a robbery, why wasn't anything taken? No security cameras had captured what happened, but a deeper examination of Danita's body revealed the truth. She hadn't fallen, she had been shot. A fatal gunshot wound to the head had been obscured by the way her body had landed. This was murder. Investigators canvassed the area, The complex, usually busy with students, was quiet due to the holiday break. Still, a few witnesses came forward. One key witness was the maintenance director. He had seen a tall, fair-skinned black woman fleeing the scene in a burgundy SUV. He'd even spoken with her. She seemed visibly shaken and admitted she'd heard a gunshot. He told her to meet him elsewhere so they could report it together, but instead, she vanished. That wasn't the first 911 call either. An earlier call had been made, nearly an hour before, but when officers arrived, they found nothing. No body, no sign of a shooting. How had they missed Danita? Word of Danita's death quickly spread. Among the first to arrive was her fiancé. He was eager to speak with Detective Pate. As standard procedure, investigators asked for his whereabouts that morning. He claimed he'd been sleeping at home after working late the night before, but no one could confirm his alibi. It wasn't airtight. Police let him go for the moment, but they weren't done asking questions. One question stood out. Did Jamer know anyone who drove a burgundy SUV? A burgundy SUV. Those three words changed everything. When detectives asked Gura if he recognized the vehicle seen fleeing the scene, his answer came without hesitation. Shannon Crawley. With that name, the investigation took a sudden and dramatic turn. Up to that point, there had even been quiet speculation that Jera himself could have been involved. Now, there was someone else, someone with motive and a history, when questioned. Further, Jera admitted to a past affair with Shannon. Their relationship, he said, had ended nearly a year prior. He described it as a mistake, one that came to a head when Shannon became pregnant in 2005. They decided on an abortion, and according to Gera, that marked the end of their romance, at least from his perspective. Although he insisted the romantic relationship was over, Shannon remained in his life. They spoke often, and he described their dynamic as strictly platonic, a friendship, nothing more. But it soon became apparent that Shannon did not see it that way. After their breakup, Shannon continued to maintain an unsettling presence in Gera's life. She began attending his church, a move he initially brushed off as coincidence. Then she bought a home near his. Again, he gave her the benefit of the doubt, assuming she simply liked the neighborhood. But as investigators began piecing together the timeline, a different picture emerged. Shannon's attachment to Gera hadn't faded. It had intensified. According to Gera, Shannon and Danita had never met. However, in hindsight, he confessed to a disturbing realization. He believed Shannon had been stalking him for quite some time. Details that once seemed trivial, her appearances, her proximity, suddenly took on a darker meaning. Then came a chilling revelation. The last time Gera saw Shannon was on Christmas Eve, 2006, less than 2 weeks before Danita's murder. He remembered walking into church, proudly escorting his fiancée Danita by his side. Shannon was there too, and her reaction was telling. Shocked, possibly blindsided. Gera believed that, until that very moment, Shannon might have still thought they had a future together. Maybe she didn't even know he was seeing someone else. But now, the truth was unmistakable. Gera had moved on, and was about to marry someone else. With growing suspicion, investigators paid a visit to Shannon Crawley. They found her at work, and began questioning her about her whereabouts on the morning of the murder. Shannon claimed she had been home, caring for her sick child. She openly acknowledged her past relationship with Gera, but her story diverged sharply from his. Shannon insisted the breakup occurred because she didn't want to have claimed that directly contradicted Gera's account about her pregnancy and the abortion. When asked if she knew Danita, Shannon said no. She explained that she thought Danita was Gera's ex-girlfriend, but given everything police now knew, this answer raised more questions than it answered. It seemed clear Gera had kept both women in the dark about each other. Then came the question that mattered most. Did Shannon own a firearm? She said no, but that too was a lie. A coworker, Ronald Simpson, came forward and told police that Shannon had purchased a revolver from him in October 2006. That gun matched the caliber used to kill Denita. Shannon had not only lied about owning a weapon, she had bought one just months before the murder. Detectives pulled the phone records for both Shannon and Guerra. Guerra's data showed his phone was at home during the murder, which supported his alibi, though not conclusively. Someone else could have been using his phone. Still, it leaned in his favor. Shannon's records told a different story. Despite claiming she had been home that morning, cell tower data placed her in Durham, around 60 miles from where she claimed to be. That location placed her near Denita's apartment, the crime scene, at the exact time of the shooting. When confronted, Shannon continued to deny she had been in Durham, but the case against her was building quickly. Detectives seized Shannon's burgundy SUV and performed forensic testing. Gunshot residue was found on the steering wheel, clear evidence that someone had fired a gun and then driven the vehicle. Combined with the witness testimony from the apartment maintenance worker who described seeing a tall black woman with a fair complexion fleeing in a burgundy SUV, the match was undeniable. That description fit Shannon perfectly. On January 9, 2007, Shannon Crawley was arrested and charged with the murder of Denita Smith. Despite the seriousness of the charges, Shannon was released on a $1 million bond shortly after. She had no prior criminal record and was the primary caregiver for her 2 young children. As a 911 dispatcher and single mother, she was seen as a candidate for pretrial release. But Shannon wasn't done. In May 2007, just a few months after her arrest, she and her attorney walked into the Durham Police Department with a shocking new claim. This time, Shannon flipped the narrative completely. According to her, Guerra had been the one stalking her after their breakup. She alleged that he would show up at her job unannounced, call her excessively, and make her feel unsafe. She said a concerned coworker offered her a gun for protection, knowing Guerra was armed and possibly dangerous. She admitted taking the gun, but claimed she quickly got rid of it. Then came her bombshell. Shannon told police that on the morning of the murder, Guerra had forced her at gunpoint into her own vehicle. She said he made her drive to an apartment complex she didn't recognize Denita's residence, where he took her phone and keys and left her sitting in the car. She described hearing muffled shouting, including what she believed was Guerra's voice, followed by a gunshot. She claimed she never saw the shooting itself and had no idea what Guerra intended to do. Suddenly, the roles were reversed, but the evidence told its own story. And as detectives sifted through the contradictions, one thing was clear: the truth would have to be untangled in court. She sprinted back to the car in a panic, shouting at Shannon to drive. She claimed Jermier jumped into the back seat, crouching on the floor and urging her to leave immediately. According to Shannon, that was the moment she briefly encountered a maintenance worker. She said she slowed down, hoping the man would notice she was in distress, but ultimately drove off because Jermier had a gun pressed to her back. But Shannon's story quickly began to unravel. First, how did she explain the gunshot residue found on the steering wheel of her own car? Shannon claimed Jermier must have grabbed the wheel while moving from the front seat to the back, leaving residue behind. Second, why was Shannon's phone pinged near the crime scene when she had insisted she was never there? She had no explanation. Investigators wasted no time confronting Jermier with Shannon's claims. He denied everything, insisting he had been at home at the time of the murder. His cell phone records supported that claim. Although it wasn't definitive, someone else could have used his phone. Meanwhile, Shannon remained free on bond. She was even granted permission to move to Charlotte, roughly 100 miles away, so she could live with her family. But the drama didn't end there. In June 2008, Shannon made yet another shocking accusation. She claimed Jermier had attacked her. According to Shannon, she had been out walking her dog early in the morning when Jermier appeared outside her family's home. She claimed he held her at knife point, sexually assaulted her, and kept her captive for hours. Police launched an immediate investigation. But what they found destroyed her credibility. A medical exam revealed no evidence of sexual assault. More importantly, surveillance footage confirmed Jermier had been in his hometown at the time, nowhere near Shannon. It was physically impossible for him to have committed the alleged attack. Police concluded she had fabricated the entire story. Still, Shannon remained out on bond for nearly 2 more years before her trial began. On February 8, 2010, the prosecution painted a disturbing portrait. Shannon Crawley had become obsessed with Danita Smith, they argued, was simply in the way of rival for the man she still loved. Her motive, they said, was jealousy, fueled by a desperate need to eliminate the woman who stood between her and Jermier. The defense, on the other hand, claimed Shannon was being framed. They suggested Jermier himself was the real killer, but they couldn't provide a clear reason why he would have done it. Instead, they portrayed him as violent and controlling, a dangerous man, capable of anything. But the jury heard about more than just theories. They heard about Shannon's past filled with false accusations. Most damaging was the rape claim she had made against Jermier, which had already been proven false. Her attorneys fought hard to keep it out of the trial. They lost. The jury was allowed to consider it a devastating blow to Shannon's credibility. Took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. He spoke calmly about his relationship with Shannon, their breakup, and her increasingly erratic behavior. He appeared composed, articulative, and likable, but the defense wasn't done. On cross-examination, they reminded the jury that had deceived both Danita and Shannon for years, maintaining relationships with both women at the same time. Then came the prosecution's final blow. They introduced a bullet fragment retrieved from Danita's body, while the murder weapon was never recovered. Forensic analysts confirmed the bullet matched the caliber and type of gun Shannon had legally purchased just months before the killing. Finally, Shannon took the stand. She stuck to her story. Had forced her to go to Danita's apartment. She hadn't known what was going to happen. She was just an unwilling participant. She testified with confidence, unwavering even under intense cross-examination. For a moment, it seemed she might hold her ground. Then, the prosecution dropped a bombshell. They played audio recordings, taped conversations Shannon had secretly recorded with Jermier after Danita's death. She claimed she made the recordings to get a confession, but something was wrong. The man's voice on the tapes sounded off, high-pitched, unnatural, not at all like Jermier's real voice. Even Danita's friends and family testified that the voice didn't sound like his. The prosecution offered a chilling theory. Shannon had staged the recordings. They suggested she'd hired someone to impersonate Jermier, braiding evidence to frame him for murder. That revelation destroyed the last remnants of her credibility. In the end, the jury found Shannon Crawley guilty of Danita Smith's murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Jermier, he eventually left law enforcement, pursued a new career in finance, and started a family. But no resolution could undo the damage of that day. Danita Smith, bright, compassionate, and full of promise, was gone. Her future stolen. Her memory, however, lives on, in the hearts of those who loved her, in the justice that was ultimately served. For years, the residents of Imperial Avenue learned to mind their own business. The strange odors, the constant stream of women who never seemed to return, the boarded-up windows, they all chose to ignore it. But everything changed when flashing sirens and a fleet of police cars arrived at Anthony Sowell's doorstep. In that moment, every unspoken suspicion became horrifying truth. Acting on a distress call and armed with a search warrant, police made their way to the house. From the outside, it looked as closed off as always. But the moment officers opened the door, reality hit hard. A young patrolman, just 3 years into the force, took one step inside and immediately stumbled back, vomiting on the porch. The air was thick with an indescribable stench, the rancid mix of rotting flesh, blood, filth, and decay. The house was a tomb. Darkness swallowed the interior. The hallway lights were long dead, the windows tightly covered, allowing in only faint ribbons of daylight. Trash, cigarette butts, beer cans, and dirty clothes littered every corner. But the most oppressive presence was the stench, so dense it seemed to choke the life out of the air. The officers split up to search. One entered the kitchen and noticed black garbage bags tied shut, bulging as if stuffed with something unspeakable. Another officer descended into the basement, but the moment he opened the door, a swarm of black flies burst out, carrying the unbearable odor of death with them. He doubled over, coughing violently, but the worst was yet to come. In the bedroom lay a female body, decomposing, her skin darkened, flies swarming. Her eyes stared wide open, frozen in terror. A nearby scream alerted others 2 more bodies had been found. One was shoved beneath a filthy mattress. The other, tightly wrapped in plastic, was stuffed into a corner. All 3 were in advanced states of decomposition. The house was no longer just a crime scene. It was a mass grave. While awaiting backup, an officer near the staircase accidentally kicked something soft. He looked down and turned pale. It was a human arm stripped of flesh, bone exposed. The horror deepened. Forensics were called in. Their flashlights revealed even more gruesome secrets in the basement piles of black garbage bags, gnawed open by rats. One bag contained a severed human head, eyes still open, crawling with maggots, hair clumped with decay. Nearby, an iron chain was bolted to the wall used, investigators believed, to restrain victims. In the bedroom, beneath the blood-stained mattress, they found a human skeleton wrapped in plastic, decomposing. Anthony Sowell had been sleeping above his victims. He lived among the dead. Beneath his bed, a plastic container held jewelry and wallets, later identified as belonging to missing women. When police searched the backyard, they unearthed shallow graves. 2 more bodies were discovered. Some victims, it turned out, had been buried alive. Old videotapes were also found, not of his crimes, but of documentaries on serial killers. He had studied them, learned from them, perfected his own horrifying methods. Criminal psychologists quickly concluded that Sowell wasn't impulsive. He was calculated, methodical. He carefully selected his victims and transformed his house into a dungeon of death. Anthony Sowell was a monster. Born and raised in Cleveland, Sowell had served 6 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, stationed in California, the Carolinas, and Japan. In 2005, he moved into the white 3-story house at 12,205 Imperial Avenue, a quiet street lined with aging homes and abandoned buildings. The house had belonged to his late father. Sowell purchased it for a low price and moved in alone. Before that, he'd spent 15 years behind bars for a 1989 rape conviction. Prosecutors had proven that he lured a woman to his old residence on Page Avenue, threatened her life, and raped her. After his release, he found work at a factory, but was laid off in 2007. When unemployment benefits dried up, he turned to collecting and selling scrap metal. He never reconnected with his ex-wife or daughter. Instead, he sought partners through adult websites. He created an online profile right after his release, describing himself as a dominant man looking for submissive partners. 5'10", 160 pounds, with a scar on his face. He portrayed himself as outgoing and fun-loving, but behind that screen was a predator. In December 2008, 41-year-old Gladys Wade stumbled onto Kinsman Road, bloodied and frantic, flagging down cars for help. She told police that Sowell had lured her in with the offer of a beer. Once inside, he attacked her, dragged her upstairs, strangled her into unconsciousness, and attempted to assault her. Wade managed to escape and ran into a nearby restaurant, begging for someone to call 911. Instead, she was told to use a payphone. As she fled, Sowell followed, shouting that she had tried to rob him. He then returned to his house as if nothing had happened. Eventually, Wade flagged down a patrol car. Police brought her to the hospital and took her statement, but her plea for justice was ignored. Officers treated it as a he said, she said case and shockingly suggested she might have been the aggressor. They briefly detained Sowell and visited his home, where they found blood on the steps and a bloody tissue outside. Snow patterns showed signs of a struggle. Still, they let him go without searching the house. At least 5 more women would disappear before Sowell was finally arrested in 2009. Wade's case became a symbol of a system failure and missed opportunity to stop a serial killer before the body count rose. When police finally raided Sowell's house, they discovered 4 more bodies and a skull, bringing the total number of known victims to 11. And Anthony Sowell was nowhere to be found, had vanished. With military training and survival skills, Sowell became one of the most wanted fugitives in America. His face flooded TV screens. Fear gripped Cleveland. Women were afraid to leave their homes. Doors were bolted. Everyone feared the monster. Still lurking. 3 days later, on October 31st, 2009, a bar employee spotted a man matching Sowell's description, wandering near downtown. They quietly called the police. Within 15 minutes, a SWAT team moved in. They surrounded him on the street, remained eerily calm. He initially denied being the man they were searching for. But once officers began fingerprinting him, the facade crumbled. He confessed. Anthony Sowell, the man who turned his home into a house of horrors, was finally in custody. But the devastation he left behind would haunt Cleveland forever. His identity was finally confirmed. Anthony Sowell was officially recognized as the man behind one of the most horrific murder cases Cleveland had ever seen. News of the house at 12,205 Imperial Avenue spread like wildfire, shaking the city to its core. But as police began releasing the names of the victims, a bitter truth began to emerge. Most of them were women whom society had long overlooked. Tonya Carmichael, 52, had been missing since 2008. Her mother had filed a report, but no one paid much attention. "Are you sure your daughter didn't just go off somewhere? Maybe she'll come back," one officer reportedly said. Michelle Mason, 45, was intelligent and had even attended college, but addiction pulled her into a darker path. When she disappeared, no one filed a report. People simply assumed she'd wandered off again. The list continued. A pattern became painfully clear. Many of the women were black, homeless, or had struggled with addiction. They were the ones most easily ignored, and now, Cleveland could no longer look away. As the case made headlines, public outrage exploded. People demanded answers. Why didn't police act sooner? Why weren't the earlier reports taken seriously from women who had escaped Sowell's home and survived? Why was the overwhelming stench, constantly reported by neighbors, never investigated? Lawsuits began to pour in against the city, and a storm of criticism descended on the Cleveland Police Department. Outside the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, a growing crowd gathered each morning. They held signs, candles, and photos of the victims' mothers, daughters, sisters, demanding justice for those long silenced. When Anthony Sowell, now known as the Imperial Avenue Strangler, appeared in court, he wore an orange jumpsuit and heavy restraints. His face was eerily calm. He showed no emotion, no remorse, as if he still held some twisted power over the room. Everyone was watching: judges, lawyers, journalists, and most importantly, the victims' families. The prosecutor opened the trial with a chilling statement. Images from inside 12,205 Imperial Avenue were projected onto a screen. The courtroom fell silent. The air turned heavy. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Tears echoed through the chamber, not just for the lives lost, but for a city that had failed its most vulnerable. When it was Anthony Sowell's turn to speak, the entire room held its breath. He did not tremble. He did not apologize. Instead, he smirked. When asked about his crimes, he simply shrugged and said, "What's done is done. Regret won't change anything." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some family members broke down sobbing. Others seethed with rage, fists clenched, barely held back by security. Sowell's blatant indifference only deepened the wounds. After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury returned their verdict. Anthony Sowell was found guilty on 82 counts, including murder, rape, kidnapping, and abuse of corpses. The judge sentenced him to death. In that moment, some families wept not out of joy, but from the bittersweet weight of long-awaited justice. For others, it felt too late. Their loved ones were gone. No verdict could ever bring them back. But Sowell never made it to the execution chamber. He spent years in prison filing appeals and delaying his sentence. And then, on February 8, 2021, Anthony Sowell died of cancer in prison. There was no final reckoning, no last statement. He passed away quietly, without pain, without suffering. A cruel contrast to what he inflicted on his victims. Some said it was unfair. Others believed his end didn't matter, that what mattered were the lessons left behind. A month later, 12,205 Imperial Avenue was demolished. In winter of 2011, a bulldozer rolled into the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Residents, victims' families, and strangers gathered in silence to witness it. They weren't just watching a house come down, they were watching a monument to evil be erased. Yet, even with the building gone, some questions remained. How many women had Sowell really killed? Were there more victims never found? What had those women endured in their final hours? Some experts believe the 11 identified bodies may have been just the beginning. The case closed with a death sentence, but its impact would last forever. Case 7. The murder of a British millionaire and his wife. In Thailand, a British millionaire and his Thai wife were found buried beside a duck pen on their farm in Phrae Province, northern Thailand. The case stunned the local community. Even stranger, none of their assets had been touched, only a recently purchased pickup truck was missing. Authorities reviewed CCTV footage from the area. They spotted 2 unknown individuals breaking into the couple's property. One of them was later seen driving off in the missing vehicle. The investigation stalled until a shocking confession came from an unexpected source. The identity of the killer stunned everyone because the suspect was someone well known, a man with a reputation for kindness, a regular face at the local temple. So, who killed this British millionaire couple, and what grudge did they hold? Let's dive into this unsettling crime. It all began on September 19th, when Alan Hogg and his wife Nat Seddon failed to attend a planned meeting with friends in Chiang Rai. Alan, a British national, was known for his punctuality. If he couldn't make an event, he always informed people in advance. When he didn't show and calls to his phone went unanswered. Concern quickly grew. Days passed with no word. Friends became deeply worried. Finally, on September 23rd, one friend decided to visit the couple's 32-acre estate in Phrae to check in. The home was eerily quiet. Inside, Alan's phone was still charging. The couple's clothes, bags, and belongings were all in place and touched, but something was missing. The couple's pickup truck was gone, and worse, bloodstains were found in the dressing room. They hadn't been cleaned. Fearing the worst, the friend immediately alerted police. Officers quickly arrived and began searching the expansive farm. The property was massive, filled with orchards, duck ponds, and fish enclosures, making it difficult to investigate. More police were brought in to help. Then, one officer noticed something odd: freshly disturbed soil near the duck pen in the orchard. It looked like a patch had been dug and refilled. Too recent, too out of place. No other part of the garden showed any signs of disturbance. However, the police brought in sniffer dogs to investigate. Upon reaching a particular suspicious area, the dogs began barking incessantly. Fearing the worst, The bodies of the missing millionaire couple might be buried there. The police brought in an excavator to dig. After nearly 2 hours of excavation on the Hogg property, police unearthed the couple's bodies, buried approximately 2 meters deep near the duck pond. The discovery sent shockwaves through the area, and the crime scene quickly descended into chaos as grieving friends and family gathered. Devastated by the news, the bodies were transported to a forensic clinic to determine the cause and time of death. Meanwhile, another police team continued their investigation, collecting statements from friends, neighbors, and relatives. Robin Hogg, the couple's daughter, flew in from the UK to assist with the investigation after learning of her parents' brutal murder. Alan Hogg, originally from Edinburgh, Scotland, had fallen in love with a local Thai woman named Nod Sutton while vacationing in Thailand. Alan was a successful engineer and businessman. In July 2017, he resigned as director of a dry cleaning company called Clayful, based in Boney Errig, near Edinburgh. At the time, he owned 5,075 shares and was the sole person with significant control, before selling the business to Johnson's Service Group. He also managed another company, Sherwood Edinburgh, which was also sold that same month. Alan and Nod frequently traveled between the UK and Thailand, and also owned a house in Australia where they spent their summers. To locals in Phrae Province, Alan was seen as a wealthy foreigner who had embraced the simplicity of rural life. Since 2014, the couple had officially settled in Thailand, building a large 3-story home with a swimming pool and poultry farm on a sprawling property. The news of their murders, and the fact that they had been buried in their own backyard, shocked the quiet, rural community in northern Thailand. Given that a foreign national was involved, Thai police faced enormous pressure to quickly identify and apprehend the killer. Forensic analysis later revealed that Alan had died from 2 gunshot wounds, while Nod had been killed with a wrench. Their estimated time of death was determined to be around September 18th, just 1 day before they were scheduled to attend a meeting in Chiang Rai. The fact that their bodies were buried so close to the house led investigators to believe the killer was someone the couple knew, someone unable or unwilling to transport the bodies elsewhere. Nod's relatives described Alan as a generous and kind man who frequently helped them financially. Nod herself was remembered as gentle and compassionate, particularly for her care of her disabled younger brother. Despite being married to a wealthy man, she remained humble and unpretentious. When investigators reviewed security footage from inside and outside the property, they discovered a major lead. Footage showed a man driving away in Alan's newly purchased white Ford Ranger pickup truck. That man was identified as 63-year-old Warakai Sakit, Nod's older brother. Police immediately launched a manhunt, but Sakit had already disappeared from Phrae Province. Many locals were skeptical he could be involved. Known as a quiet man who often helped neighbors and volunteered at a local temple, it seemed unimaginable that he could murder his own sister and her husband. After all, he had worked for the couple for over 20 years. Despite public doubt, police pressed forward with their investigation. Some of Nod's relatives actually supported the theory that Sakit was involved. They said that tensions had been growing between him and the couple. Alan, who was very particular and hardworking, often found fault with Sakit's performance. As an older man, Sakit worked at a slower pace and had difficulty keeping up. He also reportedly harbored resentment over the disparity in living conditions. His sister lived in a luxurious 3-story home while he remained in a rundown wooden house. On September 15th, Nod had visited her youngest brother and confided in him about the growing tension. She said Sakit had become uncooperative and argumentative whenever they gave him feedback. The couple had finally decided that he needed to leave the farm. This information strengthened the police's belief that Sakit was the prime suspect. However, given his age and physical limitations, investigators doubted he could have carried out the murders and buried the bodies alone. They believed he must have had accomplices. Crime scene investigators found bloodstains on the garage floor and sink, along with a suspiciously clean wrenchedly free of oil or dirt. Forensic analysis later confirmed it was the weapon used to kill. Further CCTV footage from September 18th showed a strange man arriving at the farm and being greeted by Sackett. After that moment, Alan and Nod were never seen on camera again. Investigators suspected that the visitor and Sackett were both involved in the killings and the disposal of the bodies. Determined to locate Sackett, police focused on tracking the missing pickup truck. After several days, they found it had been sold to a local man for 200,000 baht. That man then resold it to someone in Loei province for 430,000 baht. The second buyer, unaware of the vehicle's connection to a murder investigation, drove it to Ayutthaya during a business trip. Upon learning the police were searching for the vehicle, he voluntarily turned it over to authorities. With the truck recovered, police finally arrested Sackett. However, to their surprise, he denied all involvement in the murders. Sackett claimed he had nothing to do with his sister and brother-in-law's deaths, with CCTV footage only partially implicating him and no direct evidence tying him to the act of murder. The investigation took a more complex turn. Case 7. The murder of Alan and Nad Sudain Hogg. Despite being the primary suspect, Waru Sackett managed to evade arrest when police failed to detain him in time. After being granted bail, he was released, and the investigation hit a standstill, with the murder weapon missing and the couple's truck having changed hands multiple times. Collecting forensic evidence proved extremely difficult. Amid the mounting pressure, one officer suggested placing Sackett under surveillance while another team continued combing the crime scene for overlooked clues. It was during this lull in the investigation that a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A local man named Suma Upman, 50, appeared at the station with a startling confession. Suma admitted hesitantly that Sackett had approached him weeks prior, asking for help in killing his brother-in-law, Alan Hogg. At first, Suma considered assisting, but when he learned Sackett also intended to kill his own sister, Nad, he refused. Despite this, he accepted 25,000 baht and introduced Sackett to two men who could carry out the killings, Pia MC, 63, and Kapong Kamlin, 24. Based on this confession, police arrested Suma for aiding in the conspiracy, but offered him a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation. With his help, officers quickly located and apprehended all three suspects. Sackett soon confessed to orchestrating the double murder. He revealed that he had paid Pia and Kapong 50,000 baht to kill Alan and Nad. Police Chief Espat Peruda ordered the suspects to reenact the crime at the scene. Pia confirmed that around 6 p.m. on September 18, 2018, Sackett led them into the farm. Pia went to the backyard and found Alan feeding ducks. He shot Alan twice, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, Kapong entered the kitchen, grabbed Nad, covered her mouth, dragged her to the garage, and held her down while Sackett struck her repeatedly on the head with a wrench. The three men then dragged Nad's body outside and buried both victims near the duck pen using a pickaxe, shovels, and the couple's own small excavator to dig a 2-meter deep hole. After disposing of the bodies, Sackett sold the couple's Ford Ranger pickup. Later, based on their confessions, police recovered the murder weapon, a gun that had been thrown into a creek between Wangchin and Long districts. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Sackett's motive was deeply personal. He had lived on his sister's property for years, in a small wooden house she let him build. Nad had even appointed him head gardener of their expansive estate. But Alan and Sackett often clashed over farm management. When Sackett learned they planned to evict him, he felt betrayed and used having worked for over a decade without formal compensation. Sackett, who had no wife, no children, and nowhere else to go, became enraged. He feared eviction would leave him destitute due to his age and lack of assets. To fund the murder, he decided to sell the couple's new truck. Complicating matters, Alan, being a foreign national in Thailand, had registered several properties. under Nad's relatives' names, including Sakit's. Some of those assets were still legally under Sakit's name, even after the murders. In fact, the couple's daughter had considered asking her uncle to manage the farm if she moved her parents to the UK, an offer that, tragically, would never materialize. After his arrest, Sakit showed no remorse. The sheer brutality of hiring hitmen to murder his own sister and brother-in-law left the community in Fry province in shock. Nad's uncle Sanger Sukin, 78, remembered seeing her cheerful and healthy the morning of her death. He said he had never heard her speak badly about her brother. Another uncle, Prai Sudan, described Sakit as kind-hearted and was stunned to discover the truth. On June 3, 2019, almost a year after the murders, the Fry Provincial Court began the trial. Waru Sakit was formally identified as the mastermind, who conspired to kill Alan and Nad for control of their assets. He, along with Pia Kamsi and Kapong Kamlin, was sentenced to death on multiple counts. Suma Upman, due to his cooperation, received a 25-year sentence, reduced from 50 years. The court described the murder of British national Alan Hogg as a crime that severely damaged Thailand's international reputation. Pina Chen, a lawyer representing the victim's family, said Alan's relatives in the UK were satisfied with the outcome, but found the entire ordeal too painful to revisit. Saga's mother found her daughter's body and immediately realized something was terribly wrong. Her daughter was cold and stiff. She called the police and paramedics, who arrived quickly, but it was too late. Both Saga and her unborn child were declared dead at the scene. Investigators swiftly cordoned off the area and launched a murder investigation. Saga's body was discovered lying on her back on the bedroom floor, positioned between the bed and a TV stand, partially on a carpet. Her head was turned to the left, her arms placed alongside her body. She was dressed in a matching pink-ribbed outfit, pants, a cardigan, and a top. Blood stained her face, especially around the nose, mouth, left eye, and forehead. Her long dark hair, soaked in blood, obscured parts of her face. Her tongue protruded slightly, and a trickle of blood ran from her left nostril down to her cheek. DNA samples were collected from beneath her fingernails and clothing. Investigators noted impressions on her neck, thigh, pants, and the carpet matching the base of a table. Near the foot of the bed was a lamp, with its cord loosely wrapped around Saga's neck. The lamp's socket rested under her left shoulder, though the lamp itself showed no signs of damage. Its base measured approximately 8.5 centimeters in diameter. Throughout the apartment, drawers were pulled open with clothes scattered across the floors. In the bedroom, Saga's phone was found on the bed, under a blanket. The bed had 2 pillows only. One showed a visible indentation, suggesting Saga had been lying there alone prior to the attack. The bathroom floor was covered in opened jewelry, boxers. Despite the chaos inside, there were no signs of forced entry on the doors, balcony, or windows. In the kitchen, food was still sitting in a frying pan on the stove. Shoe prints were collected across the scene. The evidence suggested there had been little struggle. The coroner concluded that Saga had been strangled and suffocated using a heavy marble slab. The struggle lasted between 5 to 10 minutes, and her time of death was estimated to be between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. on April 29th. Investigators began piecing together Saga's final days through interviews with family and friends, according to her mother, Melissa. Just the day before April 28th, Saga had dinner at the Madeli with her mom and some friends. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, but Saga appeared distracted, anxiously checking her phone. She was waiting for a message from her boyfriend, Amin. Saga was understandably nervous. She was 7 months pregnant, and Amin was supposed to finally tell his parents about the pregnancy that evening. Amin's family, Somali Muslims who had immigrated to Sweden as refugees when he was a child, were deeply religious. Saga, on the other hand, came from a Swedish Christian family. Amin had hidden the entire relationship from his parents, fearing their disapproval, especially since Saga was pregnant out of wedlock. Rumors had already begun swirling that Amin had been seeing other women during his relationship with Saga. When Saga first told him she was pregnant, he allegedly urged her to have an abortion to avoid family backlash. But Saga was determined to keep the baby and told him she could raise the child on her own, if necessary. Her family supported her choice and welcomed the baby. Her grandmother, however, had gently warned her to consider how she would manage financially and emotionally, especially with a partner from a vastly different cultural background. Over time, Amin seemed to come around. He even agreed to move into a new, larger apartment with Saga on May 2nd, offering to cover the rent. However, Melissa pointed out that despite nearly 2 years of dating and a pregnancy, she had only met Amin 3 times. Melissa also recalled hearing a disturbing phone call between Saga and Amin. In it, Saga confronted him about a woman named Diana, who claimed that Amin had asked her to kick Saga's pregnant belly in hopes of inducing a miscarriage. Diana also allegedly told Saga that she was sleeping with Amin, though Amin denied these claims and calmed Saga down. Melissa was increasingly concerned. When Melissa learned of her daughter's murder, she immediately told police to investigate Amin. The police began building a timeline. On April 27th, Amin took a sick day from work and spent the afternoon and evening at Saga's apartment. She had given him an ultimatum: tell his family about the relationship and the pregnancy, or the relationship would be over. Saga herself called in sick the next day, April 28th, anxiously awaiting Amin's update. Amin had promised to speak with his mother around 10 p.m. when she would be home from work, and then visit Saga afterward. She expected him around 11 p.m. throughout the day. Saga messaged him nervously, something her mother and friends noticed during dinner. Investigators discovered that between 11:13 and 11:15 p.m. on April 28th, Amin drafted but never sent messages to Saga, saying he wouldn't be telling his family and they wouldn't be moving in together. He claimed he couldn't risk losing his family. This added to suspicions that the killing may have been premeditated. Interestingly, police learned that Amin's mother had actually returned home much earlier at 3 p.m., not 10 o'clock. Did Amin lie to Saga all along? Had he ever intended to tell his family? Or was it just a ploy to keep her hopes alive? When police brought Amin in for questioning, his behavior raised red flags. When informed that a murder had taken place at Saga's address Kungsgaten 36B, he acted oblivious, even making jokes. He didn't mention knowing anyone at that address. He asked who had died and oddly questioned how he could have possibly killed someone yesterday, though no one had accused him directly. When police revealed that the victim was Saga, his tone shifted. He quickly denied involvement, claiming he had an alibi and had last seen her on April 27th, contradicting his earlier claims of not recognizing the apartment. Due to his inconsistencies and strange behavior, Amin was arrested. Months later, he stood trial for the murder of his pregnant girlfriend. Prosecutors presented damning evidence. Notably, Amin's DNA was found on the staircase near Saga's apartment door on April 29th at 7:20 p.m. A scent-tracking dog also traced his path, and according to expert testimony, these dogs can detect scents only within a 24-hour window, strongly suggesting Amin was present at Saga's apartment on April 28th, though the defense questioned the reliability of the dog's tracking outdoors. Inspector Hannah Higstrom testified that environmental conditions did not reduce the dog's accuracy. Prosecutor Elizabeth Anderson argued that Amin murdered Saga by applying sustained pressure to her neck, cutting off her airflow and blood supply. He had entered her apartment using a spare key, likely while she was asleep, evident by the impression on one side of the pillow. The two ended up on the floor, where Amin initially attempted strangulation. Ultimately, he dragged a 30 kg 66 lb marble tabletop and pressed it against her throat, using his weight to smother her, a brutal act against the mother of his unborn child. Saga is believed to have struggled for 5 to 10 minutes before succumbing to the brutal assault. The heavy table left deep impressions on her neck and thigh, indicating that she was pinned under it. After the murder, Amin staged the scene to look like a robbery. He pulled drawers open and scattered jewelry across the floor. In court, Amin claimed that Saga may have been killed by a gang, allegedly searching for drugs. He stated that he had received a bag containing a large sum of money and other illegal items, some of which he had used. He speculated that when the gang found some of the contents missing, they targeted Saga's apartment, unaware she was uninvolved. However, the court rejected this theory. If Amin truly feared the gang, he wouldn't have been living openly at his residence. No forensic evidence, DNA, fingerprints, or any physical trace suggested any gang involvement. Moreover, if the bag existed, only someone who knew precisely where it was would have known where to look. The apartment showed no convincing signs of a thorough search. Undermining his claim, Amin's story was further discredited by sworn testimony from his friends Samir Talib and Abdi, who denied any knowledge of gang activity. Amin's DNA was found on Saga's clothes and underneath her left fingernails. He claimed they had sexual intercourse on April 27th and that his DNA could have transferred during their time together. He denied visiting her apartment on April 28th, but prosecutors presented a strong set of circumstantial evidence. Text messages between Amin and Saga on the night of her murder were deeply telling. On April 28th, Saga tried to comfort him before a meeting with his family. His replies grew distant and ambiguous. He claimed he had told one family member about her, but investigators found no indication that Amin had mentioned Saga or her pregnancy to anyone in his family. Saga's final message, sent shortly after midnight on April 29th, simply read, "Baby, talk to me." By then, Amin's phone had already been turned off. Prosecutors argued this timing was consistent with Amin being en route to her apartment to end her life. The motive, they said, was clear. Amin didn't want to keep the relationship or the child, and his own Google search history revealed disturbing intent. In November 2022, he had searched, "Can fetuses die from kicking?" Text messages also showed that Amin had once asked a friend, Diana Hussein, to kick Saga in the stomach to cause a miscarriage. Phone records proved vital. On April 28th at 8 p.m., Saga's phone connected to a tower near her home and remained there, consistent with her being at home. She was active on her phone until shortly after midnight. During that same time, she tried repeatedly to contact Amin, even asking Samir to intervene. Amin claimed to have been sitting in a car with his friend Amir during those hours, while Amir was occupied on a long phone call. But this alibi collapsed under scrutiny. Amin's phone was unused between 12:22 a.m. and 1:57 a.m., except for a missed call from Samir at 12:28 a.m., the same time Saga was trying to reach him. The signal from his phone placed him near her apartment at that moment, not elsewhere as he claimed. Further damning was the fact that both Amin's and Amir's phones were turned off at precisely 2:16 a.m. Despite Amin's battery being at 40%, investigators concluded that Amin likely had both phones in his possession and intentionally turned them off to avoid detection. The phone inactivity aligned exactly with the estimated time of the murder. Amin also deleted all messages and calls exchanged with Saga that day and removed her from Snapchat attacks that prosecutors interpreted as attempts to erase evidence and cover his tracks even before police contacted him. During questioning, Amin quickly offered an alibi without being prompted, which raised further suspicion. His behavior seemed premeditated and rehearsed, though no single piece of direct evidence tied him conclusively to the murder. The weight of the circumstantial evidence formed a powerful case. The only unresolved detail was an unidentified footprint in Saga's apartment. While this led to some speculation, it didn't negate the overwhelming evidence that placed Amin at the scene and implicated him in the murder. Amin denied any involvement throughout the investigation and trial, insisting, "Yes, I've been in denial for 9 months. I love Saga and our unborn child. I've never had any plan, thought, or idea to harm them. Violence is not in my nature." Still, the prosecution argued that Amin had invented the story about his family's disapproval. There was no evidence that his family even knew about Saga or the pregnancy, and nothing suggested he told them he intended to move in with her. The presiding judge, Lars Gunnar Lund, stated this was an honor-based crime. Prosecutors said Amin lived according to his own version of an honor code, in which being in a relationship with a white woman was unacceptable. On June 5, 2024, 22-year-old Muhammad Amin Ibrahim was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Saga. The court's decision was unanimous. Amin continues to deny any wrongdoing and plans to appeal the verdict. With her sparkling black eyes and gentle nature, Shan was known throughout her village as a polite, well-behaved, and understanding child. Her parents were farmers, and she often helped her father with the farm work. The neighbors praised her for never giving her parents any trouble or cause for worry. When she began primary school, Shan quickly rose to the top of her class, impressing her teachers with her academic performance. But a tragic turning point came when she was just 8 years old and in the 2nd grade. She began to notice that she couldn't see the words her teacher wrote on the blackboard clearly. Her eyes often itched, teared up, and burned. One day after school, she asked her mother why her vision seemed blurry, like a foggy layer covered her eyes. Her mother, overwhelmed with farm work, brushed it off as a child's idle complaint. Shan, aware of her parents' busy lives, didn't bring it up again. In the weeks that followed, she squinted at the blackboard, struggling to read what was written. When she finally told her teacher about her blurry vision, she was simply advised to rest her eyes and maintain better hygiene. But her condition worsened. A few months later, she could no longer make out anything written on the board. Her academic performance plummeted, prompting her teacher to contact her parents. It puzzled everyone. How could one of the brightest students suddenly fall behind? In rural China during the mid-1990s, televisions were a luxury few could afford. Families with even a black and white set were rare. Shan's family didn't own one. With no screen time and her days filled with studying and chores, no one could understand how her eyesight had deteriorated so quickly. When adults began questioning her, Shan described her symptoms: blurry vision, burning eyes, and that constant, fog-like layer over everything she saw. Her mother suddenly remembered her daughter's earlier comment, the one she had ignored months before. Alarmed, the family brought Shan to the district hospital, but the facility lacked proper medical equipment, and the doctors could only perform a basic exam. They prescribed eye drops to relieve the strain. After a few weeks, the drops ran out, and her condition hadn't improved. Believing it still wasn't serious, her parents bought more eye drops and hoped for recovery. But things took a devastating turn when Shan turned 9 and entered 3rd grade. Her face suddenly became abnormally swollen. She complained about an intense itching and crawling sensation on her skin. Her parents applied ointment to ease the swelling, but within a week, her face had changed drastically. Her nose swelled, pushing her eyes further apart, and the distance between them widened. Her face kept growing abnormally, eventually causing her sleepless nights. Alarmed, her parents rushed her to the district hospital again, but doctors still couldn't determine what was wrong. Lacking modern equipment, they speculated that she might be suffering from a rare, unknown disease, and simply prescribed anti-inflammatory medicine. Despite taking the medication as directed, Shan's face continued to swell. Overwhelmed with shame and the relentless teasing from classmates, she eventually dropped out of school. At home, she continued to practice writing on her own. News of the girl with the strange face quickly spread across the rural district. Curious villagers came just to catch a glimpse of her. Within months, her nose had become almost completely deformed. A large swelling had overtaken it, making it hard to even identify where her nose had been. She often had trouble breathing, and her bulging eyes frightened many who saw her. Children at school had cruelly nicknamed her the horse-faced girl. Hurt and insecure, Shan isolated herself at home. Some villagers pitied her family, while others spread harmful rumors. In this poor, mountainous area, families were extremely frugal. It wasn't uncommon for villagers to cook and eat livestock that had died from illness, rather than waste food. The Wu family was no exception. They had sometimes consumed sick or dead pigs, chickens, and ducks to supplement their diet. When her parents heard these rumors, they began to worry that perhaps their daughter had been poisoned by eating contaminated meat. They changed their household diet immediately. At the same time, her grandparents turned to traditional Chinese medicine. They ground strange herbs into pastes and applied them to Shan's swollen face, despite her protests that it caused excruciating pain. Eventually, they forced her to drink bitter herbal concoctions as well. The remedies didn't help. In fact, her swelling worsened. The only relief came from periodic visits to the hospital for anti-inflammatory and pain medications. Meanwhile, the gossip around her worsened. Some villagers even believed that the Wu family was cursed, that their daughter's condition was the result of divine punishment or a vengeful curse cast by someone harboring a grudge. Once the pride of her family, Shan had become a source of endless worry. Her grandparents suggested a spiritual solution, a cleansing ritual. Desperate, her parents spent a large sum to invite a shaman to perform the exorcism, hoping it would restore their daughter's face. But nothing changed. Watching her family suffer, Shan's personality began to shift. She withdrew even further, locking herself in her room and never stepping outside. To ease her emotional distress, her parents removed every mirror from the house. Still, she remained deeply unsettled. She longed to be like the other children, to attend school, to play games, to live a normal life. As the years passed, she grew into a young woman, unlike her peers, who enjoyed dressing up and going out. Shan never left the house without covering her entire head and face with a cloth. Her family, already living in hardship, had spent nearly everything they had on her medical treatment, all in vain. Then, another devastating blow hit the family. Her mother, exhausted from years of physical labor and worry, worked long hours both on the farm and doing side jobs to raise enough money for a proper diagnosis in the city. But the toll on her body was too much. One day, Shan's mother collapsed from a brain hemorrhage. She was rushed to the hospital and survived, but the stroke left her in a vegetative state. The burden on Xian's father, Wulong, grew even heavier. He now had to cover not only his daughter's medical expenses, but also the mounting hospital bills for his ailing wife. Since he was often away working to earn money, the responsibility of caring for her mother fell entirely on Xian. Despite living with her condition for decades, Xian had also lost her vision. To reduce her dependence on her father, she taught herself how to live in darkness. She practiced identifying objects by touch, learned how to wash vegetables, cook, clean, and perform daily tasks independently. Sometimes her food was too salty because she couldn't measure ingredients by sight. But her father always ate every bite to show appreciation for her efforts. She took complete responsibility for her mother's care, determined to ease her father's load. However, her blindness sometimes led to accidents. One day, while preparing a meal, Xian tripped over a chair and fell. The severe impact caused a large tumor on her face to rupture. Thankfully, it was raining that day, and her father was home. Seeing her bleeding heavily, he rushed her to the provincial hospital. Doctors at the hospital were shocked by her severely deformed face. After regaining their composure, they stopped the bleeding, bandaged her wounds, and conducted a series of tests. It was now 2009, and Xian was 22 years old. Using advanced equipment, doctors suspected she had optic nerve tumors, a rare and poorly understood condition, unrelated to diet or the divine punishment that villagers had once gossiped about. For Mr. Wu, this diagnosis felt like a long-awaited answer. At last, the mystery that had plagued his family for years had a name. He hoped his daughter could finally receive surgery and live a normal life, but her condition was dire. The fall had caused her to lose 1,000 milliliters of blood, nearly a quarter of the human body's total. The situation was critical, and the doctors advised immediate surgery to prevent further danger. However, there was a major obstacle: the cost. The family had exhausted all their savings. They were farmers, and when Xian's mother fell ill, their financial burden had soared. Even with Mr. Wu taking on multiple jobs, it was never enough. They often had to borrow from relatives just to make ends meet. While Mr. Wu wrestled with the cost of surgery, a doctor suggested turning to the media. If journalists shared Xian's story, they might be able to raise donations from compassionate strangers. Mr. Wu was hesitant. He worried that being filmed and interviewed would shame his daughter. She was only 22, and he feared her already. Fragile self-esteem would suffer further. But when he explained the situation to her, Xian agreed to go public. She allowed reporters to interview her and document her life. Once her story aired, media outlets across Zhejiang province and, eventually all over China, covered the case of the horse-faced girl. While some were merely curious about her appearance, many more expressed deep sympathy and compassion. Within weeks, donations poured in, totaling over $1,000 to help fund her surgery. With hope in their hearts, Xian and her father returned to the hospital, but the doctors warned them that the chances of a successful surgery were as low as 0.01%, just 1 in 10,000. The news devastated Mr. Wu. Doctors then suggested they seek help at Sun Yat-sen University-affiliated hospital in Guangzhou, which had more advanced facilities and specialists. Around the same time, Xian's story was broadcast on Liaoning satellite TV and reported in Guangzhou Daily, prompting an outpouring of donations. The family received an additional $225,000 in early March 2010. Mr. Wu and Xian boarded a train to Guangzhou, a journey longer than any she had taken in 14 years. When they arrived at the hospital's outpatient department, the petite girl wore a pink scarf to conceal her face, fearing she might frighten others. Her appearance immediately drew attention from staff and patients alike. Encouraged by the doctors, Xian slowly lifted her scarf. Dr. Li Goyin, head of the maxillofacial surgery department, was stunned. In all his years of practice, he had never encountered such a severe facial deformity. A large protrusion dominated the center of her face, pushing her eyes wide apart and leaving her nose and mouth barely visible. Her face no longer resembled that of a human. It had been likened to a horse. A CT scan revealed a massive abnormal bone growth spreading across her face, destroying its natural structure. Her eyes had been pushed to the sides of her head, causing blindness. Her flattened nose affected both smell and breathing. Her mouth had been forced downward, making it difficult to eat or speak. The doctors soon overturned her previous diagnosis. Xian didn't have optic nerve tumors. She was suffering from fibrous dysplasia, a rare genetic disorder caused by a mutation on chromosome 20. The disease replaces normal bone tissue with fibrous bone, which grows uncontrollably. In Xian's case, the fibrous growth had gradually replaced her jawbone and facial structure over 13 years. The doctors proposed immediate surgery to remove the abnormal growth. The risks were enormous, if fatal, but without it, she would remain trapped in a life of pain, isolation, and deformity. Xian and her father, after careful thought, decided to proceed. She was clear. She no longer wanted to live as the horse-faced girl, always hiding under a scarf. Her bravery and determination moved the entire medical team. Though the surgery would be extremely complex, they resolved to do everything possible to help her. The surgical plan involved making a central facial incision to remove the tumor, reconstructing her upper jaw and forehead with titanium plates, pulling her chin back to its natural position, cleaning and reshaping her nasal cavity, repositioning her eyes into their sockets. Secured with titanium mesh, removing and suturing the excess skin to create a face with natural contour. Specialists from multiple departments collaborated to develop this life-changing procedure. On the night before the surgery, Cheyenne and her father felt a mix of fear and hope. She wanted to call her mother to share the news, but her father, still protective, advised against it. Part 1. Cheyenne's journey, from tragedy to triumph. Wulong couldn't bring himself to tell his daughter the truth. Her mother had passed away just a week before her scheduled surgery. Fearing the psychological impact would be too great, all of the relatives agreed to keep this devastating news from Cheyenne. They knew her fragile emotional state couldn't handle another blow, especially with the life-threatening operation ahead. The surgery itself was incredibly intense and fraught with complications. From the moment it began, blood gushed out like a stream so rapidly that even the most experienced surgeons were momentarily stunned. The sudden massive blood loss caused Cheyenne's blood pressure and heart rate to plummet to critical levels. Yet, thanks to the team's calm professionalism, sharp decision-making, and surgical precision, she survived several life-threatening episodes. After more than 9 grueling hours, the surgery was declared a success. Over 90% of the tumor, weighing around 2 kilograms, was successfully removed. When the operation was complete and the bandages were applied, Cheyenne's face was half the size it once was. Her eyes, which had been forced to the sides of her head, returned to a more natural position. Her nasal cavity was cleared, making it easier for her to breathe. For the first time in years, she could eat normally. The only tragic outcome was that her vision could not be restored. The tumor had compressed her optic nerves beyond repair. After she recovered, Wulong finally told Cheyenne the truth about her mother's passing. To everyone's surprise, the 22-year-old did not break down in tears. Instead, she calmly accepted the loss, perhaps because the near-death experience had given her a new perspective on life. Over the next 6 months, Cheyenne underwent 2 additional surgeries, focused on facial reconstruction to make her appearance as natural as possible. She was incredibly proud. No longer did she need to hide under a scarf in public. She could finally walk outside with confidence. When she returned to her hometown, friends, neighbors, and local officials came to offer encouragement and support. Charitable organizations and government agencies brought her gifts and assistance. Eventually, Cheyenne even found work doing handcrafts, earning a modest income each month. In 2012, she returned to the hospital for a checkup. The doctors, touched by her progress, gifted her a new scarf. They encouraged her to keep moving forward and wished for her to find love and happiness. Cheyenne did long for love, but she doubted anyone would accept her because of her blindness. Then, in November 2017, her relatives introduced her to the limo, a man 11 years her senior, who had suffered from polio as a child, leaving him with difficulty walking. Perhaps because both had endured physical and emotional hardships, they quickly found a deep bond. Cheyenne couldn't see his face, but she could feel his warmth and kindness. Despite their age difference, Cheyenne believed that what mattered most was how well someone treated her, and the limo made her feel cherished. In October 2018, the couple returned to the hospital for another checkup. Cheyenne brought gifts for the medical staff, grateful to the people who had changed her life. Doctors told her that, although her tumor wouldn't spread, there was still a risk of recurrence. She would need regular checkups, 3 to 5 times per year, for monitoring. Today, Cheyenne and the limo are married and have a child together. The girl, once known across China as the horse-faced girl who had to hide under a scarf for 13 years, is now living a new life, full of hope, strength, and dignity. Part 2. The unsolved tragedy of Nancy Bennick finally resolved. Nancy Murray Bennick was born in Grass Valley, California, and spent her youth actively involved in school life, excelling in athletics at Nevada Union High School, where she played softball and served as a song leader. She loved bowling and was known for her lively spirit and strong appetite. despite her slender build after graduating from beauty school. Nancy worked at a salon on South Auburn Street before briefly moving to Hawaii for another job. She later returned to California and became a court reporter. Life was looking up, especially with her upcoming marriage to Ferris Salami, the county's chief public defender. On the night of October 25, 1970, Nancy and Ferris returned to her apartment after a social outing. Around 11:30 p.m., Ferris said goodbye and went home. Nancy, as always, left the sliding door to her second-floor balcony slightly ajar for her cat. The next morning, Nancy failed to show up for work. Concerned colleagues contacted her sister, Linda Cox, who asked friends to check her apartment. They confirmed her car was still in the lot. A coworker then contacted Nancy's son, Jack, who entered the apartment with help from the men to find Nancy murdered, stabbed to death. The murder bore striking similarities to the earlier killing of Judith Hakari, just a mile away. Both victims were young women, engaged to be married, and lived nearby. But detectives found no clear connection between the two. One man who caught their attention was Richard John Davis, a 27-year-old alcoholic with a violent streak, who lived across from Nancy's complex. However, both Davis and his roommate provided alibis and, back then, lacking DNA technology. Detectives had little evidence to go on. Investigators theorized that the killer climbed up to Nancy's balcony, covered his fingers with duct tape to avoid leaving prints, and entered through the slider. A trail of blood from her apartment to the parking lot suggested the assailant had injured himself during the attack. Yet the case went cold. Decades passed. In 2004, advances in forensic science allowed police to develop a DNA profile from evidence in Nancy's apartment. But despite frequent searches, there were no matches in state or national databases. Then, in 2019, retired homicide detective Mickey Lynx returned to volunteer on the case. She pushed for forensic genetic genealogy, uploading the DNA to open source databases to find familial matches. The breakthrough came when Davis's daughter, now in her 50s, agreed to provide a DNA sample. It was a perfect match. On June 13, 2022, coincidentally, Nancy's birthday, Linda received a life-changing call. The killer was indeed Richard Davis, the man who had lived across from Nancy all along. Unfortunately, Davis had died of alcohol-related complications in 1997, and Ferris Salami had passed in 2004. There would be no trial, no justice in the traditional sense. But for Linda and her husband Tom, the truth was a form of closure. They could finally grieve Nancy fully and imagine the life she might have had. Investigators believe Davis may have harbored unspoken feelings for Nancy and lashed out violently upon learning of her engagement. Although his motives remain unclear, the evidence, his proximity, the DNA, and the blood trail paint a picture of premeditated murder in a public statement. Linda expressed immense gratitude for Detective Lynx, who never gave up. While Nancy never got to meet her nieces and nephews, her memory now rests peacefully, and her family can finally begin to heal.